people are slow, but we shall see. Oh my gosh, I hope people get the message to come to the correct thing. Ugh.
Yeah.
What a disaster. Okay. Oh, there's Eric already. Hi, pal.
Hi, how you doing?
Good to see you.
Good to see
Andy's raising his hand apparently. I don't see the, wait, I don't see the hands anymore. Why don't I see the hands?
Go to the participants tab, and then the drop down will show everybody in there. And Andy's got his hand up.
Yeah.
You can allow him to talk if you want. I wouldn't, but you can.
I would never allow. Hang on, let me figure out how to do that. I may as well learn since I'm going to be running questions later.
If you just hit allow to talk, then he'll be able to mute and unmute himself at will, but you have to allow him to first.
Okay, Andy, allow to talk. Okay, Andy, I'm allowing you to talk, dude.
Someone's knocking at the door. Someone's ringing the bell.
Oh, dear kiddo.
I would never belong to a club that would have me as a member.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. So.
Is that a Groucho Marx quote?
Yeah.
No.
I thought it was a Groucho.
I think it was a W.C. Fields quote, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's known as a Groucho. Most people think it's a Groucho Marx quote. That doesn't mean anything. But...
Give a man an inch, he thinks he's a ruler. Give him 12 inches, he is a ruler.
So stupid. Oh my God.
It's a boomer joke.
Yeah.
So I have to officially apologize on behalf of Macro and Cheese to Patrick.
Patrick's not here, so apologize to Eric.
No, I didn't do it to Eric, just Patrick. But you remember the beginning where I had, because there were three guests, I chose three quotes.
Right.
Right. And I picked Something Profound by Bill, and then I picked Something Profound by Eric. And then the one I chose for Patrick was the one where he started out, look, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a this, I'm not a that. Stop bragging. That was the funniest line in the whole podcast. So I had to include it at the front.
It's a great line. Bill said that to me today. I said something, I'm not an economist. He said, stop bragging. Exactly what he said.
It's a go-to line for him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
hey guys, real quick, when everybody gets in here, I just want to check the sound of the three guys, make sure they look and sound good before we get started. And real quick, I want to just play a couple seconds of the trailer to make sure it sounds and looks right. You can tell.
Go
that
for
work?
it.
Okay.
We're early, so go ahead.
Okay.
That's what this time is for. What a handsome guy he is.
Oh, hey, settle down. What a strange name for a documentary, though. Knock et.
Is it
Vulcan or Klingon or?
It's backwards. I see. Very cute. Knock et.
It's orc.
Yeah. Oh, there's Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Hi, Bill.
Oh.
May all your estimators be blue.
Bill, you know Andy Kennedy. He's our Macro and Cheese sound engineer, so you've probably met a couple of times.
Well, I actually don't know if we did meet, but I feel like we're brothers because I've had to listen to him talk for weeks at a time.
Yeah. Good
Oh,
point.
poor. I have sinned against many people in that fashion. Eric can and Joe in his team can commiserate with you.
I absolutely loved the first podcast that you did with Steve, and I never heard you speak before. And I'm sitting there with my headphones on, just listening to the body of the podcast. I'm supposed to be editing it. I'm listening to it like I'm just laughing along. And I thought, oh shit, I'm supposed to be editing this. No, very, very, very
All right,
interesting.
guys, real
As a
quick,
Canadian.
I gotta try this video real quick. Make sure we're good.
Go ahead.
Okay.
Mute yourselves, people. Oh, by the way, we're already live on Facebook, so this is really fun.
Oh, good. Will you go into the PMO chat and tell Jules, please?
Sure.
I'm neither an economist or a scholar. I'm just an average American who lost my home.
Does this sound
and very
okay?
nearly my family. to
Yeah, I could hear it
foreclosure.
you could hear it fine. It's
Perfect.
plenty
I've
loud
spent
enough.
Almost every day since trying to find out why.
Cool. All right.
You guys must be so proud of that, Eric.
Yeah. It's we're still like, it feels like we're still in the middle of it. So I don't know if I'm in a position to like sit back and like feel, oh yeah, this was we're so happy. I mean, I'm very happy with how the whole thing turned out, but I don't, it's like, I don't feel like any completion or anything like that yet. I feel like we're still in the middle of it.
Have you edited all 5 episodes, or
Oh,
what
yeah.
do you mean when you say you're in the middle? What do you mean?
Well, just all the work on the marketing and PR and publicity stuff, and we're still building a bunch of content for the website and the social network sites. Like we're gonna have just at least a couple dozen short documentary vignettes that go a little bit deeper into certain subjects and that are brought up during the con, and so and some things that are a little bit outside of it but closely related.
Right.
But so we're still in the process of creating. So that's one of the main reasons between that and just like the countless meetings and conference calls, and like I feel like half my life is lived on Zoom right now.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah,
So
pretty much our entire organization.
right.
But it's exciting still. It's exciting.
I'm really looking
Andy?
forward to getting more angry in 2020 on August the 5th.
Andy, did you see Lance's comment?
No.
He said the sound volume seems a bit low.
On the
It just came across as a message or a chat or something.
Okay.
I've given you all the details I have.
is there any way to give us a little more volume, John?
I thought it was.
Where's the volume low at? Like, is it just everybody's volume?
Let's
Bill's muted right now.
Okay.
Am I the only one that saw Lance's comments come across the
No,
screen?
I'm looking at it right now. It says, I'm
Okay.
here. I muted myself. I hear everyone fine. Old Gringo, aka Lance Fawn, is here. And volume, let's see.
You're talking about the volume of the video, or
Yeah, I'm trying to find it. Let's see.
okay, Rosie and Mindy are saying the volume is fine, and Debbie. So sorry, Lance.
Well,
I
we
don't
probably wouldn't want to distort the audio because it's going to be compressed twice. So it'd be better if people turned it up on their computers, or else it'll start really crunching.
Yeah,
it up.
And
I'm
anyone
listening
that
on
has,
Facebook and I can hear it fine.
right,
Okay.
and anyone that has their mics on, like you guys when you're talking, when the trailer goes on, feel free to turn your mics off. if
For
you
sure.
know there's any background noise, just so that we have the best sound available if everybody's got their mics off.
Is Patrick on yet? I guess not. I guess we'd see him if he were.
Yep, I don't see him yet.
Okay.
I've suggested we use crickets though as
Oh.
a motif.
Oh, yeah.
There he is. All right.
Well, Eric, you're going to have to get some more books.
Yeah, I have our hard drives. Well, I do have a few books back there.
You need to put your samurai sword in the back.
Oh, I just have to switch cameras if I want that. How's it going, Patrick?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Yeah, not much.
So Patrick, we're just waiting. It usually takes until 5 minutes after before everybody's figured out how to get in here.
Sounds good.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and that's just the RP people.
Right.
That's 9.
I have a group of friends who have a weekly Zoom call because we're socially distanced, and the first 45 minutes of it is about senior technology issues. No, you press the little click. See the little thing on the left. Oh my gosh!
Where's the any key?
Right. Andy, you raised your damn hand again?
No, I haven't lowered it. I've got a cramp.
Jerk.
So if you're an attendee, your mic is automatically muted, so you don't have to worry about that. So we're speaking to the people that have that option to mute themselves or not.
Yeah, we will. Only Bill, Patrick, and Eric will have their mics on during the thing. Of course, also Trish when she's speaking, me when I'm speaking, and Steve when he's speaking. Otherwise, we will all be muted, and John too.
Yeah, I'll just.
Hey,
I'll just. Mic
Virginia, are you going to be on camera?
No, I can't.
Oh.
My computer slows down.
Right. You said that. My fault. Okay, so I'll have the picture up for you.
Yeah, thanks.
The only thing older in Virginia's apartment is her computer.
Actually, my computer is very young. I'm the only old thing in my home.
Oh, I was trying to pay you a backhanded compliment.
Oh, God.
First time for everything.
I love you madly.
Mm.
So I see Patricia raising her hand.
Okay, so how do I call on her? Oh, it's Trish. Did you let her in, John? Can you let her in? She should be a panelist. Hang on, Trish.
Oh, there's Mr. Grumbine.
Hey, nice shirt, Steve.
John, I think you're muted. Did you hear me? I need you to let Trish in as a panelist. Oh, yeah, there she is. Cool. Good. Okay, so in 3 minutes, we're going to start.
Go.
All right. Okay. Just turn my ringer off.
Good.
Okay, I'm going to mute out.
Thank you, Andy.
So Trish is going to start things off, then Patrick, then the trailer.
Yes, exactly. I'll introduce, I'll welcome people, then Steve will introduce Trish, and then Trish will speak, and then Patrick.
Okay, and so will Bill and I still need to turn off our video feed during that time?
I don't think so. No, because if John is
Ow.
playing the trailer, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, we'll leave everyone on there. And yeah, just kind of, so you want me to play the trailer after Patrick's done, correct?
Indeed.
Okay.
And what time is
Trying to
it?
figure out how to drop that background out of my thing here.
You may have to move.
No. There's a glimmer of macaroni and cheese in the background. That's.
I see.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
How you doing, Steve?
Hey, I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing well, thank you.
Anybody have any ideas on how I can get out of that video settings? There we go. And virtual background.
Where did Bill go?
I think you have to click the down arrow because Christina and Rose are on the panelist.
Oh, I see. Oh, hey, how's it going, Trish?
There she is. Hi, Trisha.
Oh, she can't hear you, or she.
Looks
Trish,
like
are
she
you?
can't speak.
Trish is mute. Is Trish muted?
It
I
looks that
think
way.
so.
Because we can't hear you.
That's being on calls with Patrick and Trish. Yeah, I have no idea what kind of a feat that is.
Oh,
You should be able to unmute her.
oh,
Virginia.
oh.
Said with love, Trish.
No, because it says that she's not muted, but when I see her move her mouth, I can't hear her.
Right, but that could be on her end
Yeah.
of her computer.
I can hear everybody else well.
Yeah, just not Trish. Okay, well, I think it's time, don't you guys?
Yeah, let's do this.
Oh, we need to get Trish's thing figured out. But
Great. It looks like we've got about 32 people here. That's terrific. So I just want to say hello and welcome everybody. I think this is our 10th monthly national outreach call, which is amazing. And this is the first time we've had such a large panel, so it's really exciting. I'm Virginia Kotz. I'm part of the leadership team here. And in a minute, our founder, Steve Grumbine, will introduce our guests, but I need to go over some housekeeping details. So at the end of tonight's presentation, we're going to have a Q&A. And since this isn't a typical Zoom call, we have both a chat window and a Q&A window. And I don't know, on the computer, they're at the bottom of the screen. I don't know what it looks like on a phone, but I think you'll be able to find it. So put your questions in the Q&A, and sometimes people have questions while the presentation is going on. So put them in there, or just put your name. Just let me know that you have it. Who's talking?
I had to run upstairs to a different computer because I was not able to unmute that computer. So.
Oh, great. Well, good, Trish. So we're glad to have you.
Very
Okay. So,
sorry.
yeah. So anyway, so what I was saying is you can either let me know that you have a question, or you can write your question and we'll ask it for you. But like I say, we're going to have the Q&A at the very end. So either way, and you can of course use the chat to chat, but use the Q&A for questions. Okay. So I'm going to introduce our wonderful founder, Steve Grumbine. Steve.
Hey, thanks, Virginia. So today is a very fun. I mean, the subject matter is pretty heavy, but it's still a fun group of folks here. I mean, I've talked to each of these individuals, and the information is really rich. But let's start with Bill Black. I've followed Bill Black for many, many years as a MMTer and someone that reads New Economic Perspectives religiously. His books that have come out, such as, the best way to rob a bank is to own one, absolute must reading. But I had the pleasure of meeting Bill at the first MMT conference, and I said, hey, we got to talk. He gave me his number. Took a while to talk, but when we finally did, we did a great show. And ever since then, we've been staying in touch, and I just have been really grateful for the friendship and the insights. But Bill is one of the not one of the, that's ridiculous. He is the leading voice in chasing corruption. And, after talking to him the first time, it became very apparent that most people haven't got a clue about what went into the Big Short. Most people have no clue what went on with the first global financial crisis. Most people don't even know about the savings and loan crisis that put Bill really on the map. But when they talked to me about it, it was so dense. There's so many interwoven conspiracies and real life, like right there in your face kind of stuff. And it's almost overwhelming. But to hear Bill talk about it and to hear the other guys and gals talk about it, it's just must understand, because it is the linchpin to understanding what's going on in society today. So with that, Bill Black is a professor of economics and law at University of Missouri, Kansas City, and the Distinguished Scholar in Residence for Financial Regulation at the University of Minnesota Law School. He is a serial whistleblower and author of the book, like I said, one of the great titles of all time, The Best Way to Rob a Bank is to Own One. So with that, I also, as I said, interviewed Bill for a Macro and Cheese podcast after the MMT conference. And he introduced me to this mini series called The Con. And I was able to meet up with his partners, Patrick Lovell and Eric Vaughan. And we went ahead and did a show. And that show took me, just all kinds of different places. It was an expansive view of the corruption that is wreaking havoc in our government, in our banking system, in the Wall Street shadow banks, you name it. There is a series of people that are the bad guys, and these folks can really tie it together for you. But before we go there, I want to just say, Patrick and Eric, would you mind introducing yourselves real quick?
Actually, Steve, we're gonna have them come after Trish, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, all right. Yeah, let's go ahead and do the Trish thing. I don't have my script here, but go ahead and do it.
Oh,
Thank you,
Trish.
Steve.
Trish, tell us who you are.
Hi, my name is Trish Sullivan Rothberg, and I work with the distributor that is putting the con out across the country. And I want to thank Steve for having me on and giving me 30 seconds to say Real Progressives is going to be partnering with us and bringing everybody the first episode of the con. It's a 5-part series at the moment, and Real Progressives has been kind and benevolent enough to show it for free on Facebook, on their Facebook page, to anybody who wants to go to the Real Progressives page or the con page. One of the benefits for myself as a layperson is the con lays it out in layman's terms. It is not confusing. The story of corruption, the lack of law following. I'm going to turn it over to Patrick and Eric and Bill, because they know far more than I do. But if you are interested in corruption and the baked in corruption in the banking industry, please tune in August 5th for the con at Real Progressives or at the con series on Facebook. And thank you guys so much. I'm going to listen now and learn.
Oh, thank you so much, Trish. And real quick, I met Patrick and Eric through Bill, and we were trading messages fast and furious. And we were in the position where, Patrick is so excited about this. He's like, have you followed this? Have you caught on to this? How have we not focused on this? And to hear his passion, it almost made me forget for about 15 seconds how much I focus my time on modern monetary theory, because underneath of the why modern monetary theory isn't exactly taking hold is the corruption, the big lie, and he's caught on to it. And so with that, let me go ahead and let Patrick and Eric each introduce themselves, sort of tell their story, where they're from and why they're here. And this is exciting. Patrick's story, I just really, really grabbed hold of. So go ahead, Patrick.
Well, thank you, Steve. And man, it's such a pleasure to talk to you folks, because I think you guys have to be the answer. You guys are hip to the game. You know what's up. I pay attention to everything Steve says. I listen to his podcast, and he definitely amplifies everything that I've got going on in my head. But I think a really good way to kind of start the conversation tonight, guys, is I'm sure many of you have been following on Twitter and some of the things that are happening out there. But I just saw a whole bunch of threads from folks like Matt Stoller and David Sirota and others. And we know David Sirota in his role and so forth. But they're chiming in tonight on all of these private equity drains of pension funds that involve, of course, McConnell, and that could be tied also to Trump, by the way. And they're showing right now, millions of dollars being drained from pension funds to pay for private jets of corporate executives and billionaires and that sort of thing. And Steve, you talk about MMT. We're 7 years into this process, right? We came to MMT late in the game for myself, and it's like, bingo, that's the answer, right? But as we started going through this project, thanks to Bill Black, and I'll fill in some blanks briefly on how that came to be, but what we discovered early, and this might be the first time many of you guys are hearing this phrase, but we realized that the only way you can get to a new deal, especially in the shadow or in the footsteps, I should say, of FDR in the New Deal during the Great Depression, was what we've got here, which is a modern day Pecora hearing. It's the facts of the greatest engineered financial crime and cover up in history, the greatest conspiracy of lies in history, that has given us this system that we're currently in the midst of this train wreck, and everybody is all over the map. And of course, you guys definitely have a center of gravity, which is just get to the truth. And the truth is that you live in a corrupt, rotting society because nobody understands the machinations of how these things operate. And so I happened to be a producer for a long time, and I fell, unfortunately, victim to the 2008 great financial crisis when I got swept up into the foreclosure crisis. And as I was going through it, nothing made sense. And I started asking a lot of questions, because that's what you do when you're a producer. And nothing in mainstream media added up. And so I decided I'm going to try to figure out what the heck is going on and how it aligns with my experience. There was a lot going on at that time period, a lot of it tragic. I mean, it was horrifying what I endured, my family and I endured, and we lost our home. We lost our home to a wrongful foreclosure. We got set up in this con that I had no idea existed. I went from being somewhat successful to being upside down overnight. And in this sort of desperation, if you will, to try to find out how things work, I just happened across a Bill Moyers interview with Bill Black, and suddenly the light went on. And I was like, wait a second, this guy knows what's going on. And so I called Eric, my longtime friend and colleague, and I said, I'm going to reach out to Mr. Black and see where this goes. One thing led to another. We had a very long call. As any of you know from hearing Professor Black, or if you've interacted with him, he is a fountainhead of information. And sorry to use that reference, but it's definitely overwhelming with information. And I remember that first call, I was taking notes like crazy. Anyway, I'll cut to the chase. I mean, that knocked over a domino that led to a 7-year adventure where we lapped this country 7 times, putting the pieces of the puzzle together that unfortunately the United States government didn't succeed at doing. And that shining light on that path was Mr. Black, and it led to a lot of unbelievable revelations. But I will end on this thought. It's worse than most of us think it is. And right now, from what I see from you, Steve, every day, I can just echo your frustration at somebody has to come and draw the attention to the center of what is how we hand off to getting all of the things that are necessary for us to save ourselves. And that's the Pecora hearing, and that's the con.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Eric, sir, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I think before that, I think that we wanted to go to the trailer really quick and
Yes, exactly. John, would you play the trailer for the con? Thank you. I think you're muted, John.
Very nearly my family to foreclosure when the market imploded.
Sorry, guys.
I'm neither an economist or a scholar. I'm just an average American who lost my home and very nearly my family to foreclosure when the market imploded. And I've spent almost every day since trying to find out why. Once the dust settled, it quickly became clear that my story was no different than millions of other Americans. We all thought that we were alone. We all thought that we'd failed, but none of us really knew why.
With a gun in her hand, Addie Polk apparently shot herself in the chest as deputies were knocking on her door with eviction papers in hand.
This dramatic increase in mortgage fraud cases was the canary in the mine. It was the warning.
This was money chasing people. This was not somebody looking for a loan.
It was all designed to maximize profits for all of the different players.
The person who sold you a loan made more money if they sold you a higher rate loan.
They were sold alive.
They're selling to their very clients these loans that they know are a disaster.
I lost my home, not because of money, because of fraud.
I don't believe Addie Polk took out the mortgage on her home. I don't believe she signed any documents.
They just generated all this junk, took home huge bonuses, and then when it collapsed, they said, oh, not us.
This notion that the financial crisis there wasn't fraud and there wasn't crime is absolutely wrong. It's dead.
They were targeting, in many cases, minorities.
We were waiting for the leadership to say, go. That never happened.
The investigation was suppressed.
This was all part of the same puzzle that was falling apart.
This is the largest conspiracy of lies in the history of the world.
This investigation has just begun.
Okay. So thank you. First of all, my name is Eric Vaughan. I'm the writer-director of the con. And when I say writer, it means mostly the script bits, because Patrick, of course, was was instrumental and probably the leading edge in kind of building the content that we had. And so when I say that with a dose of humility. Thank you for having us, first of all. But when Patrick called me in spring of 2015, you know, we'd be on the phone quite often over the years. We worked on a show that Patrick had spoken about, and that ended in 2007. And we maintained our relationship, and we were always talking about about doing different things. We did jump onto a couple of different projects. But ultimately, it was like that spring in 2015 when he called me, and he just had all of this stuff where it's like he gathered all of these articles and all these, and had all these book suggestions and everything like that, because we're trying to figure out how to move further than what our original documentary, Forward 13, had gotten to. And to a certain extent, I had almost given up because I didn't know where else to go, and so I just thought, okay, it's time to move on. But Patrick persisted. And one spring day, he calls me up and he has all this information, and I'm listening to him, I'm going through all of his materials. And I was just like, you know what? I think you're right. I think there's something here. There's something to pursue. And it was that summer, I was watching television, and the Jinx was a show on HBO about Robert Durst. And I saw what kind of a reaction it was getting. And it was very powerful, and because it was like this true crime, in-depth discussion about this criminal and all the different things that he did. And it occurred to me at that point, because I'd also just finished rewatching Inside Job for I don't know how many times, and it occurred to me that, you know what, this is how I want to go with this. And I talked to Patrick about it, because when I watched Inside Job and Park Avenue and several other really great pieces that talk about the financial crisis from the top down, even though they mentioned the people on the street, the people, you know, who were kicked out of their homes and stuff like that, it was never about them. It was always about, you know, these meetings that were happening behind closed doors and, you know, in the high rises in Manhattan and in the halls of power in DC. And it felt incredibly bloodless to me. And it really made sense to me that what hasn't been told is the story from the ground up. Because what's just like a change in a few decimal points on a spreadsheet over here turns into, in the case of Addie Polk, blood over here. And it wasn't just her. There were tens of thousands of people who had similar experiences to Addie Polk and ended up trying to end their lives because of the despair that these multiple crises created. And it became very clear to me that that was the way to tell this story. That was how the story has not been done. And also, I had to face the fact that I'm not an expert on financial crime. I'm not an expert on policy. I'm not an expert on any of these things. And so ultimately, I had to create, with Patrick and Adam, our other partner in this, a documentary that I could understand. And I figured that if I could make a documentary that I could understand, or Patrick and Hannah, that we could understand, then maybe there's a chance that a lot of other people could watch and understand to the same degree that we were quickly accruing. Because the multiple trips across the country that Patrick spoke about, it was amazing how much you learn, how much you understand you don't know, and then how much more you learn. It's just this unending process. And after the many years that we had been working on this, and so much just, sweat and tears and just, difficulty, because this was not an easy process at all, we finally came up with the project that we have now, the 5 episodes that are coming out now, and there's more to come. We have plenty of, we shot so much information, we got so much material that there is a second season's worth of material that we have, and we're hoping to be able to get to. And so that's the big thing, is that there's so much information out there that wasn't getting out to people. And it was so critically important that not only could we get it out to people, but that we could get it out to people in a way that they could understand. Because that's how you change things. My last little note on this was that the other guiding light that I had in writing and directing this was Spotlight. Everybody knew, in their own funny way, the rumors of Catholic priests, being, playing with altar boys or whatever you want to call it. And it was always a joke, right? I mean, I grew up Catholic. I heard the jokes. It was always like a little snicker, but nobody said anything. Nobody did anything about it. There's no facts to back it up. Then Spotlight comes out with their article about the Boston Diocese, where all of a sudden those rumors, those murmurs that always existed had names, dates, places, facts. And because of that, it turned into a movement. And there was a reckoning that was pushed into existence. And in the deepest part of my being, that's my greatest hope for the con, is to be able to have that actual real data that people can crystallize their thoughts about and say, now it's time to act. Because everybody knows that, oh yes, Wall Street's dirty. Oh yes, the system's rigged, but they don't know how. And that's what I think we're trying to do here. And one of the most instrumental people in helping us get to that point is the third colleague on this call, which is Bill Black. And so I'll shut up for the time being, and I'll go ahead and let Bill Black take the floor.
Hi, I'm Bill, and thank you, Steve, for all your continuing efforts over, many, many years in this regard. As Steve said, I've been very fortunate in my colleagues and teachers and people I've worked with for decades, including Stephanie Kelton and Randy Ray, who I'm sure that many of you are quite familiar with. And just in terms of MMT, my work is stuff you probably haven't focused on, but it's in what we call the microeconomic foundations. Now, let me switch to this project. I have no financial interest in this project. Everything I do on it is pro bono, much to the distress of my poor long-suffering spouse of 41 years in 6 days, assuming I will last the 6 days for these type of thing. The call I got, Patrick talked about giving me a call. I was in Quito, Ecuador, for 5 months, training Ecuadorian public officials to do anti-corruption, anti-fraud gigs and such. So my primary appointment's in economics. I have a joint appointment in law. I'm a recovering litigator. It takes a long time to recover from litigation. I have a doctorate in criminology. My specialties there are in elite fraud and corruption, and those are always linked. This is something, forget what you study in the savings and loan debacle. Elite frauds, what's different is that they get to use the resources and the seeming legitimacy of the firm they control, and they always corrupt public officials as one of their most important strategies. So elite fraud and corruption always go hand in hand in every country in the world. And I've done anti-corruption gigs, for the World Bank and India and all those types of things as well. But I've also been a banker. I was a financial regulator in the heart of the savings and loan crisis, and a serial whistleblower as well. So I learned in all of those settings. And so if any of you get an opportunity like this, when you go into a federal agency like I did, I was, litigation director at a very young age. I didn't just eat with the lawyers. I ate lunch with the appraisers and the accountants and the business manager types and the capital market specialists. And, people love to talk about what they do for a living and such, right? You've seen this on a date, when you try to connect with people. And so it was just like a graduate seminar for free if you took advantage of it. And what you'll see in our discussion is the secret sauce is always accounting in these kind of elite frauds. And, and I know that's a turnoff, and that's the point. They take advantage of our unwillingness to get our hands dirty with the accounting and learning the techniques. They think it's just going to bore people. They think it's going to be impossible to convict them. But you'll see as we get into the substantive discussion, a huge part of our message, which is so consistent with MMT, is the government can succeed. It's this belief system that has carefully been sown for decades that we cannot succeed, that we just have to trust in Wall Street. That is absolutely insane and absolutely wrong and absolutely has to be destroyed as a mindset. Thank you.
No,
Thank you, Steve. Go ahead.
No. I really want to thank you. So let me just start with this. The con itself is a series. When is the launch date of the con? When are you all planning on actually delivering the premiere and so forth? Tell us a little bit more about when we can expect that. I know we're doing it, but say it for everybody else.
The premiere will be the evening of August 5th on Facebook Live. and that'll be a free premiere of the first episode. And following the first episode, there will be a panel discussion that will include the three people that are on this panel, as well as some other folks also. After that, there will be a virtual cinema release for the next 2 weeks after that, and then it will be available for rent after that.
Okay. So I know that we have some questions in the audience from people that would like to ask. I know Charles Hayden has asked, how are you running the Q&A, Virginia?
Well, normally I do it at the end. I was going to ask Bill to go into a little depth about what exactly the process is like. You know, one of the things you just said is that is about corruption. Do people bring, write checks to the regulators? How does that corruption work? Or is it subtle? Is it blatant? How does that work?
Sure. It works in lots of different ways in different times and settings and countries and such. And one of the good signs as to whether there's any residual rule of law is whether they bother to hide it. Let me give you an example. I won't go through the technique because we actually use this to spot fraud, the specifics of it, but here's the proverbial bottom line. We're looking for bids, in this case, that are a cartel, right? A group of folks have gathered together that are supposed to be involved in government procurement, and they're rigging the bid to make sure it's a high price, and then they rotate who the winners will be, right? Classic cartel type situation. We use a technique that trips up a number of those things. And that technique that we use could be defeated if you simply paid, in the Indian context that I was talking about, 4 people to do something instead of 1 person to do something. And the quasi-taxi, the 3-wheel taxi that you see in Delhi all the time, that costs right about $1.25, right? So for $3.75, or 4 times that, $5, you could defeat our screen. Nobody defeats our screen. Why? Because it ain't worth $5. That tells you how bad the situation is. So normally, of course, people aren't using that screen, and that's the point. There's almost no anti-fraud and corruption prevention, so you don't bother to invest. Now, in the United States, usually I'm talking about corruption with a small c. So the terrible, terrible thing about the savings and loan debacle, for example, is, to our knowledge, only 1 regulator was actually corrupted in the classic sense of being bought and paid for. And one of my career limiting gestures, CLGs, that makes me unemployable in the federal government is that I blew the whistle on him. He was a presidential appointee and he had to resign in disgrace. And he was getting paid off by Charles Keating, the most infamous fraud in the savings and loan debacle. But for most of the regulators, the problem was they didn't believe it was appropriate to regulate, right? They believed the Ayn Rand, Fountainhead, Atlas Shrugged stuff that, we were always dumb and always wrong and always late, and we couldn't do anything effective, so we shouldn't try to do anything effective. And besides, anybody wearing a nice suit was probably doing the right thing, which is really bizarre because this was the 1980s and the guys were wearing polyester plaid suits in the savings and loan industry. So they didn't even have to wear nice suits to get this presumption that they must not be cheats. The politicians, they were getting corrupted through the usual, right? Lobbying expenses plus political contributions. And I allegedly humorously suggested that what we should turn one of our receiverships into was a PAC, Political Action Committee. And we should just bribe the members of Congress ourselves, and we could have saved, $20 billion because congressmen come so cheap, right? It's chump change from the perspective of a corporation to make a political contribution that will put you on a first name basis with any senator in the United States. And so the trade association we were fighting against was political scientists considered it the 5th or 6th most powerful trade association in the country. And they had a quick hitting squad of 500 CEOs who guaranteed that they would be in Washington, D.C. within 48 hours of the call to action. And every single one of those 500 CEOs on a first name basis knew both senators and typically 3 members of Congress. And so they would just come to Washington, D.C., and they would walk through the chambers, and you would be annihilated. I still have the scar tissue from all of this. You just absolutely wiped out. And all the leadership positions in both political parties within Congress were opposed to us at virtually all times. The one great exception being Henry Gonzalez, who came to be the House banking chairman through bizarre stuff type of thing, and really helped transform that area. But just to do it super short, a majority of the House of Representatives, including a majority of both parties, co-sponsored a resolution, and the signatories included the entire leadership core of both parties in the House. So it's not just a majority, but a unanimity among the people in power, calling on us to stop our re-regulation of the industry. And we said politely, fuck you. And we continued to re-regulate the industry under Ronald Reagan. And that's why the savings and loan debacle didn't become a great financial crisis through that iteration. But as the con tells you, actually, the great financial crisis in many ways is the third phase of the savings and loan debacle.
Yeah, I want to just thank you for saying that. When we interviewed you the first time, you talked about the different acts of this, horrible, let's call it a coup of our financial system, in the United States. What I would like to know, I guess, from the gang here, being that I do know a little bit about this, the one that's probably most prevalent in everyone's mind is the crash of 07, 8, 9, and in many ways still going on. Talk to us about what happened in that crash. The Addie Polk is our poster child based on the con, but talk a little bit about what was what led up to the global financial crisis for those people who maybe have different ideas, maybe have some thoughts about it, but really don't quite know.
Well, to a certain extent, we have 5.5 hours of documentary that discuss that. So it's hard to. It's like trying to encapsulate that into a brief snippet is going to be troublesome. But
Eric, you're a director. Why don't you take us through how you and Patrick unpeeled it?
Perfect.
Sort of the process through which you learned it.
Yeah. Well, so Patrick and I have developed our own process for things, and that's Patrick is an enormously persistent individual. It's like he just goes after things, and he gets all sorts of material, and he just like tosses it into a bin, and then I'm the person who's in the bin who's sorting through everything, trying to find like all the nuggets of gold, and then trying to figure out how to put those into a story. And to be perfectly honest, at the beginning, we knew from other materials, other articles, reading, legal, materials and what have you, that there were certain people who knew what they were talking about, that seemed to have something, to say that was worthwhile and fruitful, that seemed to, match up with the story that we're trying to put together. And so Patrick would go, he'd find those people, and we'd get these interviews, and then we'd go, and Patrick and I would like start prepping and figuring out what we were trying to figure out from them. And then just after collecting just so many interviews and so much information, it just got to a point to where it's like, okay, I have to sit down and make sense of this. And so a lot of it is just, it's simple. It's very similar to, I hate to use this as a metaphor, but it's sort of similar to like mountaintop removal mining, right? Where it's like you just go through all of this material and then process it and process it and process it and try to come up with something at the end. And so initially, it was just this mammoth process of going and trying to find information and trying to get as much information as we could and trying to figure out at that point, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, how these things fit together. And just like a jigsaw puzzle, as you start piecing things together, eventually an image starts to form and the piecing together becomes much quicker. And finally, when you're getting to that very end, it's very fast. And you know exactly which pieces that you're looking for and how to fit them in. And, it started off quite a bit with some of the key whistleblowers, because their stories were the most glaring and obvious that, okay, there's something obviously wrong here. And so starting off with the whistleblowers was probably one of the best things that we did. And when I say the whistleblowers, I mean people like Richard Bowen, Mike Winston, Gary Aguirre were like the three chief ones. And then, of course, Bill Black was in that first group also. And the amount of information that we gathered from them created a bunch of paths that allowed us to follow. And it was just years, literally years, of following these different paths, these different threads, one person leading to another, leading to another, leading to another, until finally we got to a point where it's like, I think we have the story. And that's sort of how the piecing together occurs. But I think Patrick might have some insights on, more detailed level.
Can you tell us what just shocked you? What was the first thing that shocked you? And take us through that, Patrick.
The first thing that shocked me was me getting thrown upside down, standing on an edge of the cliff, wanting to throw my life away for something I didn't have a clue of what happened to me. I honestly, nothing made sense. And I come from the school of, asking questions. I've been a producer forever. This is what we do in our business. And, you become a bit of an investigator. And especially when you become a senior producer on a television show, you got to ask questions of people who are writing the checks a lot of the times. And so I never considered myself naive or foolish or a sucker. And so when I was going through this process, after I got spit out the other side, it felt like, honestly, I felt like I got spit out in the desert without any clothes, and I had, my family to protect. I had to protect my family, but we were toast. I'd never experienced anything like this at the time. And so, I'm looking down the barrel of my own life, so to speak, right? I'm like, nothing makes sense. The American dream is dead for me. I'm a failure. Obviously, I'm foolish. I'm nothing like I thought I was. But then all of a sudden I started asking these questions, and I'm like, wait a second, nothing's adding up here. So that's how we started piecing the thing together. And what is the most shocking thing that I found? Well, every single time I opened up a door, it got more shocking. So Eric had always said, well, wait a second, this reminds me of a RICO case. Why don't we just investigate from the bottom up what happened and explore that question? So just by happenstance, Eric was living in California. He ends up relocating to Akron, Ohio, because his wife's from there. And he transfers his studio there. And we're in the midst of this whole development process. And like he had mentioned, we had already and that's a huge part of the story, found the whistleblowers. And the way I found the whistleblowers initially was I'm reading all of the articles that exist on the subject, and I'm starting to piece this thing together. I'm like, wait a second. This writer's not talking to that whistleblower who represents this piece of the puzzle, and that writer's not talking. Everybody was created a cottage industry of like creating silos and telling different parts of the story. And I'm kind of a big picture guy, and I'm like, wait a second, this has actually got a pattern here, right? And so that's obviously what led me to Mr. Black. And then, of course, he pulled the curtain way back. But as a result of that conversation with Eric about RICO, he had since relocated to Akron, and I'll never forget the day. I will never forget the day as long as I live. He calls me up and he says, hey, I got this story I kind of want to pursue. Turns out it's within 2 miles of his new studio in Akron, Ohio. And it turns out to be this African-American woman, 91 years old. She had shot herself 5 times in the chest the day the sheriffs had come to evict her from the home that she lived in for 4 decades. And it was a New Yorker article. And I read through it and I'm like, well, wow, that seems to have like a lot of the earmarks of everything that you had said years in advance that checked off all the boxes of what made sense to you. So boy, am I, all for pursuing what this story might be. And as we started to unravel the story, again, it's another miracle, because before that, Professor Black had taught us that there was an actual method to the madness of predatory lending. He explained to us in their own words that the industry sought to find the weak, the meek, and the ignorant. That's their words. And ultimately, I started to understand predatory lending. I remember at the time, Senator Elizabeth Warren was talking quite a bit about it. And it just didn't make sense to me because, like most Americans, I'm like, well, wait a second. You get a loan, right? You're lucky because the bank looks at you as a good credit risk. You get into a deal. You're supposed to know the terms. You're supposed to obviously be responsible. You're supposed to have stability. You're supposed to be able to pay back your loan. So it just didn't equate. What predatory lending? It was just like this thing, just like fraud, right? I kept thinking about fraud. I'm like, okay, fraud is criminal deception, isn't it? And yet it kind of felt like it was being expressed to me from all the parties, especially the Clinton sort of 2016 round, as it was like shenanigans, as I recall they said in the 2016 election. And of course that came the mainstay. But as he's if it wasn't shocking enough, right, that this elderly woman was evicted from her house and had to shoot herself 5 times in the chest because she didn't want to go homeless. Well, let me tell you something. That was just the beginning. What we end up finding out is that Addie Polk was a victim of stuff that you'll have to watch the series to understand because we don't have enough time to talk about it. It's insanity. It's incredible. But she opens up this Pandora's box. We walk through this door and it leads us right to this Summit County task force who has an AG who decides to prosecute the bad actors in Northeast Ohio under RICO. Now, remember, I said at the outset of this stream of consciousness, Eric said, why isn't this prosecuted under RICO initially, right? So I was like, holy cow. Now, I've since come to learn that there's a myriad of ways you can prosecute this, probably better ways and so on and so forth. But this just so happened to be one that we were looking for because it seemed to us, after we had been learning from Professor Black this whole time, that of course it's racketeering because there's so many different elements involved in a conspiracy for an outcome. And so shocking? Well, how about this for shocking? Do you guys know that mortgage lenders literally targeted elderly women who had equity in their homes? And the way they found that was they went to the Registry of Deeds because they could find the information that the city was providing, that they were fining these women to be able to fix their patios, the roofs, and so forth, that these women didn't have money. So miraculously, these corrupt brokers show up at their homes, knocking on the door with the whole litany of like too good to be truisms. But when you have no income and you hear that your house has increased in value tenfold, twofold in this particular area, but that you can borrow at this rate, you can pull out the equity in the house, you can pay for those fixes, cosmetic fixes on the house that you couldn't afford otherwise, that you have to, otherwise you're going to get fined. So you walk into a death trap. Whoever thought that borrowing money was a death trap? I never thought that. But then when you get inside the MMT world and you understand that the productive manufacturing, the productive American society has been completely destroyed. And what is the options now, particularly, sustainability, all the nature of what you guys are all about in terms of building a productive society, right? Let's hit the rewind button, right? What happened in Northeast Ohio? They lost industry, they lost money, they lost jobs, and that led to this massacre. It was shocking.
Bill, do you want to talk about how the process works from the inside? How they decide to go after people? What any part of it you want to talk about?
Yeah,
we're interested in all of it.
Sure. As Patrick and Eric have both said, the key differences in this documentary compared to any other documentary is something really simple. They decided to talk to the people who got it right instead of the people who got it wrong. Because the people who get it wrong spend all their time spinning lies about the crisis instead of telling you the truth. And they don't actually know what happened in the crisis, or probably they would have stopped the crisis, right? And they would have prosecuted people and such. So they're people that both lack ability and think they know, which is even worse when they have no clue what was actually happening. And they're people of very weak integrity. So they don't tell you the truth even if you ask them questions, right? So they're really bad people to interview. Now, a second group of folks that you did the fictionalized interview, The Big Short, for me, is a lot of fun, and it's got some accurate portions. But fundamentally, they went to people who got it right a full decade after the regulators got it right, and try to make them into the superheroes, even though what those guys did, and they were all guys, was to try to not have the public learn what was coming so that they could profit off of it. Because if the public learned what was happening, then the profit opportunity by shorting the stocks would go away. So talking to those kind of folks is actually not very good either. We wanted to talk to people that got it right, and their first instinct, their second, their third, their fourth instinct was, how can I throw my body in front of this bus and protect the American people? And so we talked to the same people that I knew had gotten it right? The appraisers. Now, there is no other documentary that even talks about the appraisers, and they're of significant focus. Why? Well, first, they got the savings and loan debacle right. And second, they got the great financial crisis right. But third, how many people know that 11,000 appraisers signed a public petition warning us what was going to come and giving their identifiers, right? Their full name and addresses, so that the corrupt folks could retaliate against them, right? So they absolutely risked their entire careers, gave this brilliant public warning. In the year 2000, I remind you, Bill Clinton is still president. That's how far back we're talking about. And it's the perfect warning. It's unambiguous. Only lenders and their agents can extort appraisers to inflate appraisals, and no honest lender would inflate the appraisals. And then something miraculous happened. We actually took surveys, we the public, took surveys, and they're like the great years, 1983 and 1986. So 1983 shows 55% of all the appraisals had personally been extorted in that year. 1986 shows the percentage is up to 90%. This creates what we call in criminology biz and the econ biz and the regulatory biz a Gresham's dynamic. Really important concept. In a Gresham's dynamic, you gain a competitive advantage by cheating, and that makes market forces completely perverse. where bad ethics drives good ethics out of the marketplace and fraud becomes dominant. And this is our theme. That warning, the appraisers are sophisticated folks. They sent it out to every one of the federal regulatory agencies. And the response? Crickets.
Crickets.
Then we said, I told him, well, you got to get the other guy that gave the great warning, later, but September 2004, which is still really early. And he's, no one you would ever listen to. He was the senior FBI official in charge of mortgage fraud.
Wow.
And he was so worried, he went and publicly testified and then gave interviews to everyone that would interview him in September 2004, saying there's an epidemic, his word, of mortgage fraud, his word, and predicting if we don't stop it, it's going to cause a financial, his word, crisis. And on tape, this is one of those moments that I call the beer stein throwing moment, when if you're in a bar, you want to pick up your beer stein and throw it through the goddamn television in the bar where you're watching the con. Patrick asks, so how many regulators got in touch with you in response to your warning?
Goose egg.
0. Crickets.
Hmm.
All right. So these are people risking their careers, and you'll see there's all kinds of other crap on the FBI and Justice Department end of refusing to prosecute. And then there's, the warnings of the regulators. I told you this is the third act in many ways. This combination of fraud, appraisal fraud, and what we call accounting control fraud, where you deliberately overstate asset values and understate loss reserves. I told you the secret sauce is accounting, produces a sure thing, actually 3 sure things. 1, the lender will promptly report record profits, and I mean that. They will report that they're among the most profitable banks in the world. 2, modern executive compensation will promptly make the CEO rich. And 3, down the road, years later, it will cause catastrophic losses to the lending institution, which all of us will end up paying for, right? Unless you take a real view of MMT type of thing. We can get into those details in another type of talk. So where did this begin? Like all good fraud and predation schemes, sophisticated ones, it began in Orange County, California, which literally U.S. authorities have designated as the financial fraud capital of the world. And guess who had jurisdiction over them? Because I was a regional regulator at that point. And so again, the examiners get it right the first year this begins. This is liar's loans, right? Except they're not called liar's loans yet, and they're brand new, and we have no loss experience. And our examiners get it exactly right the very first year they see them. And they say, this makes no sense. If you don't underwrite the borrower's ability to repay a loan, which is what a liar's loan does, then you will produce a disaster. You'll produce accounting gains, but you will produce a disaster for the institution. You need to drive these out of the industry. And by 1994, we had, and the last entity, this is why we call the great financial crisis the third phase of the savings loan debacle, at that point goes dive, emergency crash, dive, and says, we got to get the hell out of this industry because these regulators are going to put us in jail. And so they voluntarily give up their federal deposit insurance for the sole purpose of escaping our jurisdiction, because we only have jurisdiction over insured institutions, which brings us to the next beer stein throwing thing, because Congress, God forbid, actually does the right thing. In exactly this same year, 1994, when AmeriQuest, which we also interview Patrick interviewed the author of The Monster, which is all about AmeriQuest. I highly recommend that everyone read that book, right? So everybody knows there's this huge, obvious fraud where they literally inside AmeriQuest call the room the arts and craft room, right? Because and the smell of whiteout, God help me, the smell of whiteout in the morning, I love it, type of thing, right? So this is just a blatant fraud and predation. Congress passes a law in 1994 that gives the Fed, and only the Fed, the authority to stop all of this. And all kinds of people, and the con puts many of them on camera, warn the Fed. This is a disaster. Use your statutory authority. Stop them. Guess who's chairman of the Fed? Alan Greenspan. And why is he chairman of the Fed? Because Bill Clinton reappoints him twice. A partisan Republican, literal Ayn Rand groupie. Ayn Rand's executor of Ayn Rand's will. Guess whether he's going to be willing to regulate and protect the country. And of course, he refused, and Bernanke refuses. And I'll just leave you with, after we show you how we were able to get over 1,000 felony convictions of the most elite bankers in the savings and loan crisis, and how we were able to get over 800 of the most elite folks in the Enron era frauds, you're going to see a third beer stein throwing moment when Pelletier, top federal prosecutor, super successful, not part of the chicken shit club, says, in fact, you saw it in the clip at the beginning. We were waiting. We knew how to succeed. And we never got go. They were never authorized to actually bring the prosecutions. So that's what the con does, but it also puts the lie to this whole idea of the Tea Party that the perpetrators are poor Black people, whereas they are absolutely the principal victims. And we show how catastrophic the losses were. So the median, that means in the middle, Black and Latinx household with a college degree lost respectively 60% and 72% of their total wealth in the great financial crisis. So we're 1 year from the 100th anniversary of the Tulsa racial massacre designed to destroy Black wealth. This is the greatest destruction, quite deliberate, quite targeted in the history of Black people since slavery, and also massive with regard to Latinx. So we don't just do the fraud stuff, we put predation, and as Eric emphasized, we give it a human face through telling the story of Addie Polk and using it to explain the more general problem. And as a huge collateral benefit, as Patrick mentioned, it turns out you'll love these people. This little group of folks who had never done a significant white collar case in their lives in Akron, regular cops mostly, had the greatest success against mortgage fraud of pretty much any group in the nation. And when you ask those guys, and they're all guys and they're all white, hey, did this fraud stuff target anybody in Akron? I go, of course it did. People of color.
Wow. Yes. You guys, we have so many questions now. I want to start going through them, if you don't mind. And then I'll start with Charles Hayden, who asked, how pervasive and pernicious are bank statement loans and stated income investor loans today?
You want me to? They are massively reduced from what they were during the savings and loan debacle, and unbelievably massively reduced since the great financial crisis. So by the peak year in a great financial crisis, about 40% of all mortgage loans made mid 1987 were liar's loans. That was over 1 million years alone, and the incidence of fraud, according to the industry's own fraud experts, was 90%.
I believe you meant 2007, Bill.
I'm sorry, did I apologize?
You said 1987, 2007.
Yeah, I have time machine. Thank you. 2007, just before the market collapses, about 40% of all loans, that is over 1 million fraudulent loans a year. Are there equivalent to liar's loans now? Yes. They're probably on the order more of 3% of mortgages at most. They were significant in automobiles, Uber drivers in particular, for example, and such, which may not fill you with an enormous confidence if you ever want to have to collect on one of their insurance policies. But again, that was more like 15% of the market. And of course, cars are a lot less expensive than homes, and they don't have the same property of a massive bubble. And massive bubbles really matter, because one of the sayings in the trade is a rolling loan gathers no loss. To roll a loan is to refinance it. And that meant you could, as long as the bubble was expanded, you could keep it from going into default for often more than a decade and such. The same dynamics don't exist in automobile lending. So a liar's loan is not always the same, depending on the industry that you're talking about.
Okay.
I'd like to plug. Can I plug in a comment here, guys? Or Virginia,
Yes. No, go ahead, please.
So, first of all, you can see from my distinguished colleagues that you're getting a lot of information, and a lot of information that I can tell from the questions here from a lot of smart people out there, many of whom are very aware of what we're talking about, and some really trying to come to grips with this whole thing as if, what can we do if it's that pervasive? And I want to just make this point briefly, because the con is not an autopsy of history. As Bill mentioned, it's the third act of the savings and loan crisis, but what are we in the midst of right now? What do we want to term that 5 years from now, right? We've got everything from September of 2019 with repo emergency funds to commercial loans, which was in the $7 trillion range. We've got now this revelation of the $60 million fraud in Ohio yesterday, actually in Akron, I believe, right, Eric? Anyway, I'll come back to that. Yeah, Cleveland, Northeast Ohio, regarding First Energy and a politician, mega corruption situation. But then, as I opened up with, obviously this revelation of stealing from pension funds, the hedge funds, and these huge, like BlackRock and Steven Schwartzman involved with the likes of Mitch McConnell and Trump. This is the con, which is our system. And we continue to get railroaded in this catastrophe on top of the COVID disaster. And it seems to me like there's 3 or 4 mega disasters happening at the same time. And when I listen to Steve and I listen to where you guys are in MMT, the two questions that always permeate in my mind is how many people understand the true cost of the 2008 great financial crisis, and to understand also that it was based on an engineered criminal conspiracy that led to a massive cover-up. Many people understand the TARP program, which was $750 billion. They don't understand the intricacies of what that program did, but they have a sense of it. They were all told, just like Bill so eloquently pointed out, that the Tea Party likes, especially after the Rick Santelli rant on CNBC following the great financial crisis, blamed the victim, as did ultimately the Big Short, not knowing really this aspect of what we're revealing now, this many years later. And what does that mean with regards to MMT and everything that you guys have been talking about? Well, the real cost of the 2008 financial crisis, in terms of what the Fed pumped into the system to save the banks and the global calamity that had happened because of the derivatives fallout, was to date, and this is through the Levy study, and we got this from Better Markets, and I hold this to be as on the money as it is from the numbers that I've seen, $29 trillion. With how many prosecutions did Professor Black say? $29 trillion for this many prosecutions of a criminal syndicate. Would we be surprised we're in the midst of everything we are? It's step and repeat. It's the story over and over. So if MMT, I believe, is going to see a light at the end of the tunnel, that hopefully we can get to that New Deal, that Green New Deal, and all of the other things that you guys have been front and center on, really going back to 2016, or probably way, way back, but obviously when Bernie got involved. And the big question that I have is this the first time anybody's hearing this? Because what I'd like to know is, why hasn't the people who care about the working class, the minorities who've fallen on short term, why haven't they the ones been to tell you yet everything that we're telling you now? I don't understand why we're in this position, but we hope that 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now, that everybody that needs to tap in to the realities of this story can come to it. And I'll give you a final example before I hop off of this point. 2 weeks ago, no, 2 days ago, let's see, what are we now? Wednesday, 3 days ago, Sunday, last week, we had a Twitter storm from Warren Gunnels, from David Sirota, and many others, including incredible journalist David Dan, that off the heels of all the insanity that's going on with Bill Barr and the SDNY with regards to Berman and Clayton and the cover-up of Deutsche Bank and all of that stuff that's happening right now, because of whatever we want to, encapsulate our perception or perspective, or just what's on full display of our Attorney General Barr. All of that intersection of that activity is just a continuation of the people in power allowing this criminal rot to continue unfettered. And where is all the money going? Where is the CARES Act money going? So at the end, it just seems like somebody's got to step up and hold up the truth so the American people can understand we have been targets and victimized of a corrupt system that knows no end.
So, hey, Patrick, this is Steve. And Bill, before you go in there, I want to make a point that I think is vital. You hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of people that care about this stuff, but they're not bringing these things out. This is a departure for me because my primary focus is macro. To Bill's point, this is a micro issue, though it has macro implications for sure. But what I want to state, and I hope that you all take this in the spirit in which I'm delivering this. You guys are my tribe because you are pissed off and you're not watching your language, because the fact of the matter is people are really freaking dying right now. And it makes me enraged. The gentleman's club, the legs folded across and the pinky out during tea, as we're watching people effing die. And I want to just drop a mega F-bomb because I'm so angry. Patrick, you and I have talked about this. I almost lost everything in the global financial crisis. It's what got me started into this MMT thing to begin with. It is when I realized the calamity that I was facing. It wasn't like the 2 master's degrees I got were somehow or another the thing that did me in. It was this whole big freaking charade we're living in. And you guys have brought it out. So I want to thank you for not being dainty. Thank you for not being gentlemen. You're gentlemen, but you know what I'm saying. I want to thank you for not pulling punches and screaming into pillows. You all are my heroes, and I want to make sure I state that unequivocally, because I really have very little tolerance right now for the people that are putting their pinky out during this, because people like myself are suffering immensely, and I know people are doing even worse. So you guys are really heroic in my book. Thank you. Anyway,
Right back at you, Steve.
Thank you so much.
That is exactly why we made the con, and why we made the con the way that we did, is because this isn't to me so much about the people in the glass towers in Manhattan. This is about the people in the poor neighborhoods in Akron. And that, what you just said right there, Steve, is exactly right. I don't think people know how much this hurt and to what extent it hurt people. And if anything comes out of this is people to understand that either if you were one of those people that were hurt, that you're not alone, or on the other side, if you had no idea that people were hurt like this, that you were going to be faced with that right now and hopefully do something about it.
Okay. I'm going to go to a few more questions. I think Stavros is gone. If you're not, please let me know in the chat. But Cheryl has a question, and Cheryl, why don't you ask your question? I'm going to unmute you if you'd like. Are you unmuted? Can you speak? Okay. Uh-oh. Did she disappear? Did I kick her out? What happened? Oh, no, there you are. Hang on. Let me unmute you. Wait a second. Well, I don't know if I can do it. You may have to click your own microphone. Sorry about that. Yeah, now you can speak.
She says she's not a fan of speaking on video, so why don't we just go ahead and read hers off for
Sure,
her?
Steve, can you read it? I'm in the wrong thing.
Nope, that's okay. So Cheryl stated, how do we get corporate interests out of healthcare when they've sold hospitals on products that dictate their every move, software that directs patient flow, outsourcing data collection on quality measures, along with the more tangible observables? Would like to learn how to fight from others' successful efforts. Please help.
I'll take a crack at it. This is actually why a really progressive answer to healthcare is critical. As long as you fight it under a current system in which it's tied to employment, and there are all these Cadillac plans, you've sowed division among the American people, right? And it's always, oh, we can't do any of that. That might hurt some folks that are on this kind of plan. But you're now seeing with COVID and mass unemployment, one of the critical reasons why any health plan tied to private sector jobs is utter insanity, right? You'll lose the jobs and your protection goes away. And so we really do, this is one of the things where we really need a radical transformation, and anything else isn't going to work. And so we have to show, and as I said, I think people with the COVID thing are more willing to see now how absolutely deficient the system is. Also the statistics, of course. Remember the criticism of Italy at the beginning and how, it was supposed to have a vaunted healthcare system, but look, it was the worst in Europe. Well, look at their numbers compared to the United States at this juncture. And Italy's got a reopening economy and such. So everything we've gone through is a test case that has demonstrated your point, Steve. This is one that kills people. It kills, in this case, at least 100,000 people more than it needed to, even with Trump in, right? We would have been protected against the worst of Trump if we had real health care.
Let me say this, Bill, real quick. You brought up something to me, and I knew it inherently, but I also have a different angle at which I'm looking at the world. But when you validated that belief that this is a bipartisan, this is not just bad Republicans, this is bad everybody, right? This is not, doesn't just an R or a D does not dictate where the evil lies. This is a bipartisan screw job. So don't anybody get all high on the hog because you think you're somehow or another elite in group A versus group B. They're all bad and they're all in this game. I mean, that was kind of the real wake up call. We don't have a champion. It's up to us to bring this stuff out.
Because the bad
does
guys,
everyone know historically, by the way, why this happened?
I had the luxury of doing the interviews with you, so I kind of know a little bit of it.
Yeah, this is all World War II evasions of wage controls that produced this.
Explain that, please.
Sure. There were wage and price controls, and John Kenneth Galbraith was in charge of them. And so corporations looked for ways to evade them, and benefits were basically not capped. And so you offered this really generous healthcare benefit to evade wage controls. And of course, it was an immense shortage of workers. So anything you could do to get a competitive leg up was a huge advantage. And that is the origins of these plans that persist today,
I wanted to
80 years later.
I wanted to comment on this as it relates to an experience I had while filming towards the end of our filming. It happened last year when I was interviewing Paul Pelletier from the Department of Justice. Bill kindly introduced him to us, and we got him on camera, and we had this phenomenal interview with him. And as Eric will probably grimace, I have a long history of really asking broad questions to start the interview to narrow down, because I'm trying to get a perspective on the history of where these guys are coming from. And we get through this whole process, and at the end, I'm trying to add up, well, wait a second, wasn't the FBI talking to the DOJ? Where were the criminal referrals? And like Bill pointed out earlier, there were no criminal referrals. And I kept thinking to myself, well, as huge as this was, is how so many people came up, probably, well, as we pointed out, 11,000 appraisers, rang the warning bell as early as 2001. There were thousands. 2000. There were thousands of warnings to all the people that mattered who could have stopped this, Alan Greenspan being at the top. And so I asked Pelletier, wait a second, well, what's the DOJ doing at this time period? And, why isn't this on their radar, right? How can the department? And he says, well, we were busy with our number one concern, which was healthcare fraud. That was in 2007. And I'm thinking or 2006, 7-ish. And I'm thinking to myself, what's going on now? It's probably beyond our comprehension.
Though in fairness, if you want another Bierstein throwing moment, he also emphasized that the Attorney General had as a high priority that they go after porn.
That's right.
And not child porn, just regular porn.
And that was also in the Bush administration against Chris Swecker. It happened in both areas. There was the porn thing. It's like, hey, when in doubt, when you want to, wait a second, this is what also Keating did, right? He was completely anti-porn. So what we're seeing are these guys who champion themselves as these incredibly moralistic leaders and, for the community, yada, yada, yada. And meanwhile, they go after porn while they're still in trillions of dollars from the meek, the weak, and the ignorant by their own terminology. It's like,
it might be an interesting study to see the politicians who are most preoccupied with porn, just how much financial misdeeds they're involved with.
We could probably write an algorithm.
Correlation is not causation, I understand, but
well, Steve has heard this one before, and Patrick and Eric, but our motto, we had two mottos in the savings and loan debacle as regulators. One was never to be the ones chasing mice while lions roamed the campsite. And the second was it was not necessary to hope in order to persevere, because objectively the circumstances were hopeless. I only began to give you the political things that made it hopeless. There were far more than what I listed. But in fact, we succeeded to a really extraordinary degree. And that's because, and again, progressives need to understand this. Just regular people, GS 11s and 12s and 13s and such, took on the most sophisticated folks paying lawyers then, far less, a mere $750 an hour then. Now it'd be $3,000 an hour, and beat them routinely, as in to well over a 90%, closer to 95% conviction rate against the most sophisticated criminal defense lawyers in the world, where the bank will spend money like water to keep the CEO out of prison. So we can succeed. And to track something Patrick said earlier, crickets, that response isn't just what Chris Swecker got and the appraisers got and we got, back in the day in the savings and loan debacle. Crickets is what are we getting now from progressive politicians, right? The perfect issue has been elite fraud and corruption. It's the issue that Senator Warren, it's the issue that Bernie Sanders absolutely should have had front and center. They should have been promising to conduct a Pecora hearing. They could have actually conducted Pecora hearings. The Democrats have had control of the House. They can hold hearings, and the Pecora hearings, they don't have to subpoena Trump members. They can bring Obama folks, but they can bring, more to the point, all the whistleblowers. In the savings and loan debacle, of those over 1,000 felony convictions we got, to my knowledge, not a single one of those people we got a criminal conviction against appeared again in the great financial crisis. Now, in the great financial crisis, instead of 1,000 felons, you have, 10, 15,000 mid and senior level felons, all of whom got away with it. All of whom have learned a lesson: I can defraud with impunity. Now, what the hell do you think they're doing now? What do you think they're going to be doing over the next 30 years? If we do not make this a national priority, we will all pay. And as Steve has emphasized, yes, it's a huge amount of money, but it's also lives. Right?
Let me ask you a question, because it took me some time. Patrick is a fast speaker, and you are a very fast speaker too when it comes to when you get rolling and excited. And the word Pecora took a minute for me to grab hold on to, and I had to look it up way back. But I think it's important. Most people, that word is not right on the tip of their tongue, so they wouldn't even know to Google what they're talking about with the Pecora hearings. Can you just briefly explain that, so to fill in that gap? Because I know that I had questions and I studied my butt off. I can guarantee you some of our folks here would love to know that.
You want me to do it, or you?
No, please, either one of you. Yeah.
I'd like to take a crack at it, just because I represent most people, right? I'm a college graduate. I get into the business of production instead of go to law school at that time. I studied political science. I'm not, a PhD guy, right? But I'm, eternally curious, and I've always been involved in everything in terms of activism and understanding how the world works to the best of my ability. But like you, Steve, I didn't understand the ins and outs of what took place, not only to create the Great Depression, but how the Great Depression was solved until we got into this project. And what's so remarkable to somebody like myself is it's such an extraordinary display of what democracy can do when it serves the people. And so one of the linchpins of why we actually created this story is we wanted to understand, how did we go from of, by, and for the people to of, by, and for the corporation? And as you understand the Great Depression, there was a lot of these same elements, obviously slightly different, but a lot of the same elements that Wall Street was deceptively selling securities through illegal reps and warranties, through a whole variety of different Ponzi scheme-like scenarios that would ultimately wreck the global economy and, of course, lead to catastrophic consequences, right? Are we in a similar situation? Oh, yeah, we are. And what they did was there was a gentleman by the name of Wright Patman, a congressman from Texas, came out of the Farm Belt populace, really started to tap into the nature and the magnitude of this financial fraud. And by the way, so did Byron Dorgan, a senator who tried to stop the deregulation of the Glass-Steagall Act in 1999, the only one on the floor of the House, and all the Democrats went against him during the Clinton administration. But back to Pecora. So the investigation starts to happen, as Bill explained to us and taught us. He's a Sicilian immigrant. He's a prosecutor in New York. His name is Ferdinand Pecora. He is not an expert in finance, but he's an expert in scams. And he's also an expert in organized crime. And he puts the case together to discredit the bankers of the time. He brings up as witnesses all the CEOs at that time of the major banking consortiums, and he asks them, how did you make your money? Well, once people started getting wind of what actually was happening, because he presented the facts, the overwhelming consensus, the critical mass, because of the pain and suffering of the Great Depression, led this critical mass of people to demand that the government work on their behalf. And they did. And they got Glass-Steagall, and they created the Securities and Exchange Act, and they created everything that was supposed to create, as in Bill's words, which have always rang true for me, the ability to make honest business thrive. Because when you have cheaters, it's a race to the bottom. And there's more to that, by the way, that Bill taught us with a gentleman who won the the Nobel laureate, Mr. Akerlof, for fishing for fools. And that's another thing that we present in the con, in terms of, again, the regulators knew what to do. They knew how to stop this. They knew it coming out of the S&L crisis, and then we got reinventing government. So we're at this crossroads yet again, and things have gotten from bad to worse. After I went through the 2008 great financial crisis, and I'm looking at you, Steve, I never thought I could ever experience more pain in my life. And I thought everybody went through this. And it didn't occur to me till maybe 6 years later, when I'm interviewing a whistleblower from the SEC, a gentleman by the name of Gary, when he says, apparently people haven't suffered enough. And so here we are, right? How much suffering do you have to have before the American people don't get woke, but wake up and actually demand accountability because they know the facts? And that's what the con presents, is the facts. Who knew what, when, and how it was done, who covered it up, and why. And it goes from, like Eric has always said, common knowledge to specific knowledge. And when you've got specific knowledge, you're not a chump. You can't get played anymore. So when you're looking at this election, Steve, who do you think should ring the bell on this, given everything I watch you say day in and day out?
Now, Bernie Sanders should be out there friggin' saying it. But given the fact that we've got two people that I consider to be right of Reagan running, I can't expect either one of them to do it. So, I mean, Bernie Sanders is the only one that has any standing to do that, and he hasn't done it. So unfortunately, we got no one. We got no champion.
Well, how about you guys take on the con and help us get it over the gates?
Dude, that's where we're at. But that's it's exactly the point. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
So, let me just
go ahead. We have a question, but keep going.
Pecora created the political space for real substantive change. And FDR's famous phrase was, "The bankers hate me, and I basically glory in their hate." Right?
Yes.
We need a progressive politician willing to be that way. But your broader point was the critical one in many ways, Steve. You hadn't heard of Pecora, and you read a ton. Yes. So that means our progressive candidates never raised the concept.
That's right.
Even though it was in many ways the most obvious, successful path, right? A proven successful path. And that isn't the only time it was successful. So why don't we get the equivalent of go? Right? Just like the prosecutors never got the equivalent of go. Why aren't the progressive leaders saying, create Pecora with us, round up the 500 whistleblowers. Let's have hearing after hearing after hearing in which we expose the seediest things that went on and the people that were hurt. Why don't we do that? It's obvious. Why don't we have ads run all the time by the Democratic Party that show a trough with pigs feeding?
Because they would be in that trough themselves.
Yeah, that's right. And you know what Patrick said before you came into this, it's really, really ringing my bell. I've heard you all say it before. Now it's really stuck in my craw. And that is common knowledge when it turns to specific knowledge is a very, very big game changer. And what I want to just say is that we see a lot of our tribe running around using the term eat the rich, using the phrase eat the rich. It's, in my opinion, a very lazy term. And not to say that we shouldn't do whatever, but it's very lazy because it stops the conversation short of specific knowledge. We're going after people on a feeling. We're not going after people to get a Pecora hearing. There's no specific plan of attack. It's just a bunch of angry people spinning as whirling dervishes and teacups. And we're not actually making the kind of progress on this because we refuse to get specific knowledge. And so to me, this is huge, huge, huge.
And here's the key that everybody has seen if they've seen a congressional hearing. Pecora did the questioning himself, not the members of Congress. And so it was sustained professional cross-examination by somebody who was an expert in what? The con. We can do that under House rules or Senate rules.
Look, I don't want to, first of all, I need to let Eric talk, but I got to jump in here because Eric is the man on that. That was his point and that was his purpose and that was everything. And one thing I will tell you guys too, is that he wrote a thesis long before we got into this, and he called it The New Aristocracy. And it was just a historical sort of detangling of how the law corrupts absolutely, or power corrupts absolutely. And it brings me, we heard Professor Black say earlier, it's not necessary to hope to persevere. And that definitely became my mantra. This took 7 years to get this information on camera to bring to the people. Nobody wants to air this, guys. Netflix doesn't want to air it yet. HBO doesn't want to air it. Why? Because they get their debt financing for the people that we're exposing. Too Big to Fail has its fingers around everything, right? And like, think of those old cartoons of Rockefeller, you know, with the octopus, which led to, of course, Taibbi's vampire squid. But it wasn't until Mr. Black had also taken me the full scope to Bastiat. I'd never experienced or think I'd ever like a libertarian. But Bastiat said, when plunder becomes a way of life for a group of men in society, over the course of time, they create for themselves a legal system that authorizes it and a moral code that glorifies it. This is about the integrity of law. And as you can see from Professor Black, he is the man that we all have to, I believe, follow if we can, through this group somehow, get the attention of those who actually have the microphone to the 40 million plus people, 100 million plus people that need to hear this message and understand the details that lead to specific knowledge. Because once you understand what is going on, that's when you can solve it.
This is fantastic. Eric.
Just one last point on Pecora. Actually, Bill had gotten to the main point that I was gonna get to, but the last one beyond that was a point that actually Bill quite often makes, is that one of the biggest things that Pecora did is that ultimately he discredited the bankers, right? Because when you think about the world today, they're still able to get away with just about everything because they are still the authority. They still have all of the benefit of the doubt, so to speak. The system is geared towards them. Pecora's ability to discredit them so that they had nowhere to hide and the public opinion could move squarely against them was the big thing that he did that, as Professor Black had mentioned, created the political space that allowed so many of the reforms to happen after that. So discrediting the bankers is what he did, discrediting and embarrassing the regulatory, sorry, I'm getting this all wrong. But when Bill Black was regulating in the S&L crisis, the amount of criminal referrals that put the Department of Justice into a position where they had to defend the fact that they weren't prosecuting anybody was once again, the huge turning point there. So basically what the lesson is that we're getting from both Pecora and the S&L crisis is that we have to embarrass the powers that be into action. That seems to be the only going thing that pushes the needle.
Yeah, they can handle a lot of embarrassment when their pocketbooks are involved. Let me ask a question from Roxanne, Rebecca. I see lots of commercials for reverse mortgages. Are they a good tool that can be manipulated by the con artists, or are they a con from the jump?
Bill, are you gonna jump in?
Yeah. So the typical answer is somewhere in between. Usually it's not the best thing to do. They're not simply a con. There are circumstances under which it could make some sense to do it, but there are often ways that add a lot to fees, and it's typically not your best choice.
Our good friend Steve Mnuchin did most of his damage with reverse mortgages. That was where most of the foreclosures that he forced occurred.
Yeah, let me just take on real briefly that yes, they can take a lot of damage, but this was really Eric's point. Once you get a substantial number of those 1,000 felony convictions with around a 95% conviction rate, and you get hundreds of civil suits, which are not against the bank, the way you saw in the great financial crisis. They're against the individuals, taking their money away, which is what we did. We never sued the banks for the money. We always sued the individuals. And you have a campaign of making public in plain English with somebody like me explaining it, what the fraud scheme was, such that it is not hidden in the business pages, but gets to the front pages of the newspapers. Then what you saw was, as soon as we filed suit, or as soon as an indictment was brought, politicians were rushing to give the money to charity that they received in political contributions. And so their greatest strength, this ability to corrupt through political contributions, became an enormous liability. So you're right, you can't just bring a couple of them or even a dozen or two, but if you bring hundreds and you put it in the public record and you make a big effort to explain it in plain English so that human beings can understand it, not just lawyers, then you can succeed in all these things. And again, here's the key. We know how to succeed. We've done it repeatedly. There are a bunch of people that know how to succeed. There were a bunch of people that knew how to give the warning. What's special about the con? That's who they went and interviewed.
Very good. All right. Let's see, what questions do we have next? I know Stavros isn't here, but Stavros is a very, very informed MMTer. I want to just take his question real quick. He says, Professor Black, would it be fair to say that the periods in U.S. history during which actual criminal fraud, etc., was not orders of magnitude more widespread and effectively accepted, if not lauded, than it was being recorded, prosecuted, and punished, would account for no more than, say, 10% of the existence of the Republic.
I think that's about right, but there really was, now take this with huge grains of salt, okay? When we talk about golden ages for productivity growth in the United States, we are not talking about golden ages in terms of treatment on race or gender or anything like that, right? We're not nostalgic for these time periods in that regard. But from roughly the end of the war through roughly the end of the 70s was a period in which there was dramatically fewer of these kinds of abuses. This is not, so again, the con actually explains another critical concept of a criminogenic environment, right? It isn't just random stuff. It's not just we're emoting. What changed? Well, the con is the first one to really emphasize the super important regulatory change was in 1980. Anybody? I'll do it to the whole viewership. I'll wait, 20 seconds. What was the big deregulation in 1980? Because again, this is a real informed group in many cases.
Oh.
$1980.
Google it.
Okay, I'll tell you, interest rates.
Watching the chat. Go ahead, Bill.
Interest rates, right? When you deregulated interest rates, you made three things immensely possible. One, predation. You simply could not have had payday lenders in the old days. Two, massive growth by banks. And without that massive growth, you don't get the massive frauds, right? And the third thing is massive growth leads to too big to fail. So that is you want to talk about going from general to specific? That's something that should be on a progressive agenda. Bringing back some degree of interest rate controls should be a core aspect. I don't think any progressive has it on the list much, right? They have some specifics about how you deal with payday lending, but not the more general point, right? So that was a massive environmental change that made the world more criminogenic. Modern executive compensation made the world vastly more criminogenic. The removal of true partnerships, where there used to be joint and several liability for all the general partners, where you don't, you would actually monitor what your partner did, because if he screwed up, and it was always a he in that era, they didn't have to sue him. You could have literally no negligence at all, and they could come and take away everything in your fancy house, including the $12 million in artwork. That concentrated the mind wondrously in terms of some degree of private market discipline. And there are a whole series of other things that the con goes through. So again, you need to put it in plain English for folks. You need to put it together for folks. But as you said, it's always moving from the general idea. For example, the system's rigged, finance is rigged. Well, of course it is. But how is it rigged? And how do you change it? That requires the specific inquiry. And again, The Con is the only documentary that actually does that.
So one of the most fascinating things for me while we were putting this together was how the story of deregulation creates such an interesting and compelling narrative. Like, there's direct lines between things. from the deregulation of interest rates, leading to Garn St. Germain, and that having directly leading to the S&L crisis. And then,
Excuse me one second. Christina, could you please mute?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead, Eric.
And then, of course, when we get into the later 80s, 90s, and 2000s, we see the entire story of how with each, if a regulation is a door and deregulation is the opening of the door, you see how the con marches through at every step. And to me, that is one of the most intriguing parts about putting this story together, was seeing how clear the sort of cause and effect relationship between deregulation and escalation of the con actually was.
One of the things we try to get away from is war metaphors, because they tend to have this idea that you can have a decisive battle and win, right? When you're dealing with elite fraud and predation and corruption, every generation has to fight this. It's eternal vigilance and lots of losses along the way. But if we give up in the progressive side, look what happens to the world.
Amen. So this next question is coming from Jabari Morris, and he says, how would the Powell memo fit into the big cons of the past 4 decades?
You want me to take it, Patrick?
Sure.
Okay. So Powell is brilliant memo in these terms. So again, that's an interesting example. Obviously, the person asking the question expects the Powell memorandum to be something that progressives understand, right? And that makes sense, but it also back to the, well, then why don't we all know what Pecora means, right? We have to do a similar job as on the Powell memorandum. So Powell, again, was a super duper corporate lawyer type, very close to the business trade associations, and about to go on the Supreme Court. And he created this memorandum saying, we business are playing it like idiots. They are much better spokespersons on the progressive side. We need to counter them. We're actually subsidizing our enemies through the academy. We need to take over the academy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what's really telling is he says the most effective person is Ralph Nader. The person he feared the most was Ralph Nader. And why? Because Ralph Nader says CEOs should go to prison if they do things that kill people. Well, duh, yes, of course they should. And that was the point. CEOs don't worry about the corporation. They don't worry about fines to corporation. They don't even worry about fines to themselves because the corporation will pay those fines. They worry about CEOs going to prison and losing their wealth. And The Con, again, is the only documentary that focuses not on quote unquote corporations, which is stupid because they ain't people. They don't think, they don't have plans. Humans do. And for short, the CEO is typically the key person. Now, it's actually whoever has true control, regardless of title, obviously. But let's just use CEO for short for whoever actually controls the corporation. Well, that's what The Con focuses on. And this is why this is an absolute classic response we got when I was trying to convince the Department of Justice to prosecute. The person that may seem obscure because he was the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of California, which is Sacramento, but I assure you was not obscure. He was a top person in charge of training of all the prosecutors on mortgage stuff, we explained how the fraud mechanism works, right? Where it's again accounting and the firm ends up losing money, but the CEO makes a ton. And that's in 2 Nobel laureates' article because they worked with us in the savings and loan debacle, George Akerlof and Paul Rober. And the title of the article says it all: Looting the Economic Underworld of Bankruptcy for Profit. The firm goes bankrupt, but the CEO makes a ton of money, right? And so I send all this stuff off to this U.S. attorney because he says to Huffington Post, what Black's saying doesn't make any sense. Banks lose money when they make bad loans. Why would they hurt themselves? Now, he can't keep his pronouns straight even when they're only about 6 words apart. They is the CEO. Themselves is the bank. They ain't the same. And the best way to rob a bank is to own one. That, actually, I didn't, by the way, make that up. I was quoting the California Savings and Loan Commissioner in congressional testimony, explaining exactly this point. But presumably this is a U.S. attorney playing stupid, right? Nobody's that dumb that they can't separate a corporation and the CEO and figure out all through history the leading cause of bank failures is CEOs looting banks, right? That's a historical fact. That's the type of dishonesty that we faced all the time, right? And people like him were never called to account. They went on to higher and higher positions in the task forces, which guaranteed that the task forces would fail. Because again, this is like I think Patrick's phrase, right? And that is, Satan's greatest trick was convincing us that he didn't exist. These people convinced themselves fraud couldn't exist.
Absolutely. Steve,
You know I've arrived when Bill Black quotes me.
That's beautiful.
So listen, there are a couple of people who have second questions, like Charles and Jabari, but I want to be sure we've gotten to everyone whose questions haven't been asked yet. So I'm not ignoring you two guys. Well, one of the questions is, ask Bill how he got such a glorious beard. I think I'm going to let you take that privately later.
Hold on, I gotta say something. When I looked at the screen for the first time, I saw Bill, and I was like, "When did we get Noam Chomsky here?" I was like,
I called him Santa Claus this morning.
I love it. It is a glorious beard. It's a
He
professor's beard.
stood on the banks and parted the sea for me, and I just followed.
Absolutely. Okay, now Steve, there's a question here from James Roninger. Is hyperinflation driven by government spending a myth? Is that something that's really MMT deep? Is that something we want to get into here, or do you want to?
Let me say this, Bill. You're muted, I think. By the way, you unmuted.
I'm unmuted.
Okay. Well, one thing I want to say that before I let Bill take this, the fact of the matter is that corruption is one of the core things that can lead to hyperinflation. It's not government spending necessarily, but it kind of ties back to this whole thing that this whole conversation we're having is about. So while he may not get the answer that he was seeking, I think that will answer it even more broadly and yet give specific knowledge, as we're saying here, to the subject. Anyway, Bill, if you wouldn't mind, that's a great question.
So I will piggyback on your answer. Our usual answer is, of course, you can produce hyperinflation, right? That is a possible thing to do. But if you have a sovereign currency, you really have to work at it. And you have to be fundamentally indifferent to the massive inflation that you're creating. And so to tag on your answer, what circumstances are people typically indifferent? When they're corrupt. So hyperinflation can be a great way to move money into your own pockets if you're a corrupt head of state. It's a kleptocracy.
What just happened today, guys, or yesterday in Ohio? There's a bust for $60 million in corruption. What was the upside to First Energy? What kind of money are we talking about there? This stuff with these figures of the pensions. Sorry, the likes of BlackRock and Schwartzman and so forth.
Yeah, but Patrick, you're still thinking about tiny bucks.
Yeah,
we're talking about people who are stealing billions of dollars out of a country like the Central African Republic. That takes some real doing.
Wow. Corruption is corruption. And you can't.
No, corruption varies enormously by the level of the person doing it. And for the same reason that fraud is so different when the CEO. You have not just the seeming legitimacy, but you control the prosecutors. You've already seen with Barr how far you can get even in a place like the United States. Imagine in other countries where there is literally zero danger of you ever being prosecuted. Coups are a danger, but that's a different issue.
I think the general corrosive nature of corruption is another thing that really should be touched upon as well. I mean, because when corruption is left unabated, I mean, you get stuff as blatant as what we were seeing. To go back to what you were talking about with Ohio, I mean, the energy company in Ohio was putting payments directly into the Speaker of the House of Ohio's bank account. That is how blatant they got to. You don't get that blatant if you're in an environment where financial crimes are prosecuted on a regular basis. I think that is indicative of just how far we've gone out of the simple fact that we do not pursue criminal prosecutions of financial crimes.
Yeah, to give you a specific example that reached a high level but started much lower, Spiro Agnew, remember him, right? So Spiro Agnew, when he was first bribed as a Maryland commissioner, he was bribed with groceries. His take was so tiny. And he graduated as he went up the political totem pole to actually taking bribes at his desk as vice president of the United States of America. So, the scale changes, but some of these people are such pathetic at corruption, like Trump, actually, right? And this is not a sophisticated person in terms of corruption and such. And Spiro Agnew was very much the same. But that was the point. He could literally, at the beginning, his cut was like $30. And they literally would paid it in terms of a bag of groceries.
Wow.
Giving a different view to the word bag man.
Indeed.
But to bring it full circle, Steve, in everybody, I mean, come on. We all know the lights are not flashing red. Have we gone over the cliff yet? I don't know. We got what, 20, 30, 40 million people unemployed. We got the CARES Act where all of the funds are being funneled to the top. We've got this corruption that we're talking about. And on top of all of the other issues like climate side and everything else that we're all aware of. So the question is, at what point do people go, that's it, no more. We got to do this. We got to overcome this and hold the people that they know who can trumpet this to the masses accountable. Steve, I got to put the question to you. You've been doing it. So I've been looking at some of these comments here, and there's a lot of frustration out there. There's a lot of folks after everything we've discussed tonight that still think that in the end, there's nothing that can be done about this. And I really believe that the whole point of setting out the truth that people can follow, especially because there were 16 million filed foreclosures by 2012. We know that when you talk about the pensions and the victims of the foreclosure crisis, many of whom, and I don't know what percentage, but these mortgages, these liars loans and how they end up going in through the courts and in the foreclosure madness and all of it, we're talking, I would not be surprised if the number's north of 100 million people globally that were directly impacted or just destroyed by this engineered disaster. Like Bill always points out, the S&L crisis that they got right was 1/180th the size of what the great financial crisis came to be. The figures are 41.6 trillion,
41.7 trillion
to GDP. So guys, what are we talking about? Are we going to twiddle our thumbs and go, okay, now we got the information, what do we do?
So let me answer that for you, because this is a super important question, and it's the eternal question that we're all going to have to ask ourselves from both MMT and corruption and all these things. Whenever you get past the bumper sticker, you've got eyes that have rolled back in someone's head, and they're waiting to watch the Kardashians. They're waiting to watch another binge run of Breaking Bad or maybe Rick and Morty, Guilty. And the bottom line is that if we can't find a way to get people to listen, and I mean, for real, you watch even now in this election, all you have is Trump bad, Orange Man bad. We have no other choice. It's Biden or die. And so this is the full subset, including the universal set and every other set in the Venn diagram of the political discourse right now. There is no alternative. And so they block anything you're saying is a distraction from this partisan volleyball game that's going on. And that is what is taking over even the coronavirus. Even the coronavirus is somehow or another a partisan issue. So
I'm with you on all that, Steve. I'm with you on all that. But here's the story. The con is a murder story.
Yes, it is.
It's the murder of the American dream and the equality of law and the integrity of law. It's a murder story. And the bottom line is people pay attention to murder stories because the American dream dies where power lies.
Great. I love it. That's a good bumper sticker too, right there.
That's the point, buddy.
We have our work cut out for us, but what you're doing right here is presenting this into a consumable fashion that I think that, just remember, for the last 5 years, we've tried to just get people to understand the bottom line is that federal taxation is not a requirement for spending. In other words, the country's not going to go broke by giving us health care. And so just to make that point stick, it just goes over even our allies' heads. So to take something like this, we have to make them realize that their heroes have been pocketing their money. Their heroes have been hurting them. Their heroes have known this stuff and have sat silently by as these things have happened. And these are the moments where you have to realize, hey, man, my mom and dad maybe weren't great parents, and that's a hard thing to say out loud. Or Ronald Reagan, he's not a hero. Oh, my God. So there's all these people that have to go through these emotional moments. They're severely, deeply held beliefs that this other thing is the wrong thing. And you're trying to redirect their attention to the right thing. And it starts making everything they ever thought about their lives have to change. All the dominoes that went into what they thought made up their life have just come crumbling down. Now they've got to put it all back together. And so I think that this is a big part of the making this point. Hey, guys, people are dying. If that doesn't get your attention, you know what? You are in the process of being conned too. How we make that stick, that is a marketing question that we've really got to work together to solve. But I mean, it to me, it's clear as day.
Yeah, but there's another element, Steve, and that is this is good politics for them.
I agree with that 100%.
I mean, in fact, it's great politics for them. So when people won't do it, even when it's great politics.
Well, you already answered that question. They're the ones guilty. The reason they won't do it is because they're on the take.
So what happens if everybody watches the con and then they ask our leaders, especially those on the progressive side, hey, do you know what the con is?
Let's do it, guys.
Let's do it, man. You've got a fully engaged team willing to do this, brother. No question about it.
I am so inspired by you guys. I love your courage. I love your humanity. It's people like you that must rise to the challenge of this moment. This is chaos. I don't know if it's end times, but it's certainly a mammoth freaking earthquake under our feet. And I've got a kid. I want to see a better day. I want to see where justice is restored in this country. I want to believe that when I look at elected officials, that integrity matters. That's where this whole thing started for me, guys. I summed this whole thing up the first time Eric and I lapped this country, and I looked at, how everybody's got to make decisions, right? And I just formulated it this way. On one column of our soul, we've got character and integrity. On the other side of our soul, we've got hypocrisy, duplicity, and complicity. What I learned through this whole process is, my God, how complicit can people be when they're look in the Gresham's dynamic and all of these formulations of circle the wagons. And I think to myself, once again, the greatest trick the devil ever played was to convince the world he didn't exist. And the only way you suss that out is with the light. And Addie Polk, a woman, a 91-year-old woman, African-American woman who owned her house for 4 decades that she and her husband worked to the bone to achieve, which is a great accomplishment, a huge achievement, especially in the Black community, as was told to us by Pastor Harrison. I want one day to arrive on her property that has been raised. And this was the idea of Bill Black, and have a candlelight vigil with millions of people tuning in that will finally come to understand that Addie Polk was a guide to this horrific truth that our country has fallen in on itself to allow to happen, because we are nothing as we were told to pretend we are our whole lives. It's time to move forward in a way for truth and justice. And I'm sorry to act like I'm getting on a platitude here, but you're the only guys that actually care, quite frankly. You're the only guys that I can tell out there in the netherworlds who care. And I believe that the only way that this thing is going to overrun the walls is if you guys make a determination to do so.
Yeah, we're there, brother. We are there. I mean, so there.
Do you mind if we let Charles ask his question? I'm going to, Charles, I'm going to allow you to talk, and I think and unmute you. And you can ask your question now.
Thank you guys so much. I wasn't expecting that. Hi, Bill.
Hello.
I just wanted to ask, did any other politician express support for the Bank Whistleblower United pledge, just say no to campaign contributions from financial felons? I know Jill Stein sort of, tripped over herself to sign y'all's pledge. I actually helped put out a petition on, one of the sites back in the day. That's how I ended up working with Professor Bowen. But Jill Stein's the only politician I know who's signed that. I don't know about Hallie Hawkins. I don't know if anything came of it this election cycle. So
You're correct. Jill Stein was the only one who signed it. One of Bernie's folks said, we have a problem with the dollar amount you could take from a bank officer. And we said, well, that it was a mechanical thing of sorting through and being able to knock them out. And we said, we'd be happy to work with you on that. And they, crickets in response to that.
Thank you. Jabari, I'm going to unmute you. And, when I first joined Real Progressives, I said, we have to be patient zero and spread this thing. That's what we have to do now. Jabari, can you, wait a minute, sorry.
Hello?
Yes, great, go ahead.
Yeah, I think he answered my question earlier. It was really about how the Powell memo, and I really, a writer that used to be her name is Laura Avery. She put out a 6-part series on the Powell memo and really broke down how deadly it has been to America over the last 40 years. And how I think that, because of how articulate Powell was and how sure he was of his plan, it really made our situation horrible for us who or not part of the con ourselves.
I agree with you entirely, and it's one of the things that if you've read my stuff at all, I write about the concept of control fraud and predation, which is when you control a seemingly legitimate entity. And the point of that is these are the uber predators, the apex predators of the world, because they can use all of the resources and seeming legitimacy of the entity. And in this case, of course, he was dealing with the leading business association in America, so they could bring together literally hundreds of corporations following a similar strategy. And the change that they created in the academy, for example, is enormous. I'll give you an example of it. I was born in Detroit, grew up in Michigan, so I had in-state tuition at the University of Michigan for 7 years. Then I went off and did various work things, and I was at a conference with a current University of Michigan law and economics prof who was created through the Olin Foundation, which is a leading example of how they implemented the Powell Memorandum. So they put hundreds of these folks in the academy. And I was talking about how the great financial crisis was one of the easiest crises ever to have prevented. And he just sneered at me and said, well, then you must be incredibly wealthy. And I said, no. And he said, well, then you can't have been right because you would have just shorted them. And this is the mindset of these people. People like me spend all our time trying to warn people to prevent the harm. They think that you should profit from the harm, which would require you to keep it secret, right? From other folks. So they have such a bent mindset, so damaged by their view of laissez-faire that I agree with you, have caused enormous harm. And I've talked about it today. They are the leading cause of the Alan Greenspans of the world, where here's the really sick thing. They don't need to be bribed. They will do the corrupt thing without any additional bribery.
Yes, and that's the scary thing. It's just that it's to the point where people don't even have anything regarding the conscience. Everybody's like, oh, it's the market this, the market that. And I have to put it the way that Dr. King best put it. He said that there's socialism for the very rich and rugged individualism for everybody else.
Thank you, Jabari. Cole, you had a question. I'm going to unmute you. Am I? Oops, sorry, I muted you by accident. Cole, you have to unmute yourself, I guess. Yes, go ahead. Cole, are you still here? Okay,
you want to read it, Virginia?
Sure.
I mean, I can do it if you'd like.
Yeah, you do it, Steve.
Okay, so Cole says, are there any candidates currently in office or running that have proposed anything to reconcile these regulation issues that led up to this? Has any one of these possible candidates asked for advice or recommendations?
No, and we didn't simply wait for them to ask. We have tried to make contacts for years with Bernie and with Senator Warren's staffs to volunteer these things. And it isn't just, the couple of us. Informally, we call the group, at least at this point, the Con Busters. So the con brought together a bunch of people that got it right. And what these folks have in common includes the fact that they would be more than willing to help any public official who has any sincere desire, as opposed to a smokescreen, to make things better. So we're out there. We're eager to help. And again, that's the point. It would make political sense for them to do this. It doesn't cost them anything. They could take advantage of immense success that they don't even know exists. But it ain't happening. And it's not going to happen until basically progressives make the sufficient demands on them. You want our votes in primaries? Commit to not just saying generalities, but specific knowledge, bring specific reforms.
I got to ask you guys. I mean, who on the progressive side, right, might want to know that 60% of African-American college-educated net worth evaporated because of predation in this con? What about Latinx, which is a higher number than that? So my question is, why in the world hasn't this already happened? Now, I do remember, we've been after this a long time. We've tried everything. I mean, we've had bank whistleblowers meet with Elizabeth Warren's people in 2016. There's a story behind that. There's some really interesting things. I mean, would it make sense to anybody that those that we think would champion progressive causes haven't already really told you all the intel of the con?
Patrick, let me just say this. Everybody that we look at these candidates and they're pathetic. They're awful. They're an atrocity. They're an embarrassment. Okay. And people have got such dumbed down expectations that anybody's going to do anything for them, that they sit there and elevate these parasites like they're noble. And in reality, we had a group go out there to talk to Cory Booker, for example, and asked him on hidden camera, and we got the video and everything, why did you reject that proposal? Why are you taking big pharma money? Why are you taking all this money? And when he got on the hook for it, he was like, well, if I give it back, will you? I mean, it was great footage. But this guy's been heralded as a progressive. Not in my book. Not in my book. And so you look at this and you got to realize that the people that are willing to hold the line and demand that these people do something is minuscule, because people's expectations are so dumbed down.
Exactly. Look, we got to have some champions step up, man. I mean,
yes.
I remember one of the greatest days of my life. Honestly, I was talking to, as I recall at the time, Stephanie Kelton quite a bit, because she was Bernie's economic advisor in 2016. And I had just kind of started to really ramp up on the con with our development of what we were doing. And I remember I was in the mix and I was trying everything I could, because you guys can see I'm a little bit eager, right? I'm always second, what's going on here? It doesn't make sense. I gotta connect with people, and we gotta talk about this, and we gotta people to scream from the mountaintops. And I remember I'm watching the 2016 debate in Brooklyn, and Bernie steps up there and he says, Wall Street's business model is fraud. And like Bill said earlier tonight, you could have heard crickets. I think it was Matt Lauer who was the NBC moderator. He just kind of sat there silently, no follow-up. What do you mean by that, Bernie? Could you explain what fraud you're talking about? What is fraud? Well, we heard Hillary talk about inside voice, right? You remember that? Inside voice, outside voice. And then she's getting, all this payment from Goldman Sachs. And then Trump's like, hey, look at Hillary's getting paid by the man, right? And this guy, and I got to make this point, guys. I got to make this point. And please, if you're tired, stay tuned to what I'm just about to tell you here, okay? President Trump sues Deutsche Bank in 2012. For what, Steve? Do you know?
I have no idea.
How about this? Remember what I told you at the beginning of this whole show that reveals the entire con, the $29 trillion con, based on Addie Polk shooting herself, a victim of predatory lending that she didn't even know there were loans taken out of her house? That's a victim of predatory lending, right? We all can agree to that. Would you say that most everybody that's making comments, they can conceptualize that an African-American woman who's lived in her house for 4 decades that has to shoot herself in the chest instead of going homeless is a victim of predatory lending? That's safe to say, right, Steve?
Are you going to tell me Trump was a victim of
Trump sued Deutsche Bank for being a victim of predatory lending.
Oh my God.
Did you guys hear that? President Trump, obviously the freaking hail to the masses. Hey, look, I'm on your side, guys. We're going to drain the swamp. And then he puts in everybody from Goldman Sachs. I think it was 5 different people from Goldman Sachs who became in his cabinet right away. Whatever. He sold Deutsche Bank. He sued Deutsche Bank for being a victim of predatory lending. It's in the book Dark Towers by David Heinrich, a New York Times columnist. If that doesn't land right now during this election cycle, and if somebody like from the progressive side doesn't go, wait a second, we've had this horrible thing post George Floyd. We now realize that there is an actual targeted predation by our financial system that walked away with trillions of dollars while millions suffered. And if they can't get on board with that, then I'm at a loss, guys. I really don't know what else to say.
You don't need to. That's amazing. We're in a position, Patrick, quite frankly, where, you watch me. People, I guarantee you there's the pinky out, tiny China teacups that absolutely see my timeline and want to run the other way as fast as they can. But I have gotten to the point now where I'm just so done. That this is specific knowledge that I need to really incorporate. And just so you all know, I haven't done any live feeds other than the podcast now in well over a month. And we're in the process of getting ready to do a reset because we are about to totally revamp our video production here. And so these are things we're in the process of generating a new show. And this is going to be a focal point of that, just so you know. I'm making a rather declarative statement that the show I'm going to be doing is going to be largely focused on, because, I've been hyping the idea of a Green New Deal, hyping the idea of a job guarantee, and all these things are absolutely vital. But the problem is the reason why we're not getting there is because we have not routed out the corruption. We have not, in fact, brought these things to bear, and we don't have the critical mass to focus on these key issues to be able to push the ball over the hill to, in fact, bring these things into fruition.
That's why it took us 9 years to get this thing together. Ultimately, it was 6 years in the trenches with Mr. Black, Professor Black, and everything that. But guys, the whistleblowers we have are great champions. They basically stand at the top of every episode and they just tell you that they had a C-suite view of this incredible criminality. They didn't sit on their laurels. They didn't pretend like it didn't exist. They didn't hide. They showed courage. They came out, they put their lives on the line, their careers on the line, which became their lives. And they actually became, according to Mr. Black, the perfect tell. They were there. They were the perfect witness. And so the question becomes, as you go through all of this, why wasn't the New York Times trumpeting this like they would an echo chamber, for example, the Russian investigation for the past 2 years, right before COVID, or Watergate back in the day? Same with the Washington Post. Oh, who owns the Washington Post? These are all silly questions now, right? So everybody, I come from the 80s, right? And in the 80s, nobody was naive. We saw all sorts of crazy stuff. But in the end, the good guys always brought the long of the law down on the bad guys. We always thought that guys would go down. And of course, Bill Black is that era, right? That's what I grew up with. This stuff that we're in the midst of now, I'm 51 years old. This is insanity.
Dude, you and I are the same age.
It's insanity. What do you mean? You look way younger than I do.
No, dude. 1969, broski. 1969.
I got you beat by slightly. I'm October 68.
Okay.
So let's have a 68 convention, shall we?
Yes.
Some noise at the Democratic convention behind you guys. Who wants to make this the center of gravity? I do.
Yay.
Who wants to expose the corruption? I do. Anybody want truth, justice, in the American way? I do. Come on, man. How long are we in this call here? Let's look at all the people. I got some people on board. Let's go. Let's win this thing.
Absolutely.
Let me give you two
Absolutely.
things about these whistleblowers as well. That should, again, one is another throw the beer stein through the bar TV screen. But the other is one of the great analytical takeaways. So the first is throw the mug. Richard Bowen had the balls to put Robert Rubin personally on notice of the accounting frauds, right? Massive accounting frauds, massive frauds of ripping off Fannie and Freddie to the tune of 100 billion annually, roughly 80 billion roughly, in bad product. Now the losses would be smaller, a mere 20 billion, but massive frauds, right? And Rubin's response was pure mob. I was assured someone would have taken care of that problem, which they had by taking Richard Bowen, who used to have a staff of 220 or something, and giving him a staff of 2 and sitting him in a broom closet with no authority, right? But the second one is this. So you got Richard Bowen and you got Michael Winston, and they got advanced degrees and a whole history of getting things right. And they both taught at universities, right? So like they're the perfect witness. And not only does the Justice Department and the SEC refuse to prosecute, which is one hell of an indicator about them, but second, look at all of Wells Fargo's problems, right? Where every 4 months they announce they got a new CFO or chief operating officer, and this is finally going to change their ethical standards. So Michael Winston and Richard Bowen, to just do the super brief version, proved absolutely right, gave warnings internally. They didn't run to the press, just exactly like they were supposed to under their position descriptions. So they did exactly what they were supposed to do. They proved exactly correct. Had they been listened to, they would have saved hundreds of billions of dollars in losses. And then they showed the courage to withstand all the pressure and do everything right and go to the prosecutors eventually in the SEC, right? So they are the super duper exemplary folks that every bank says they want to hire. And certainly Wells Fargo, which wants to signal that it's actually serious this time in turning a new leaf, should hire. And it is now 2020. So that's basically 13 years since they were pushed out. And both of them are unemployed and unemployable in every financial firm in America. Now, not every financial firm in America is corrupt, but every CEO goes, if I really got in trouble, I might be tempted to do some accounting massaging. And if I have that guy in the C-suite, I know what he's going to do. The right thing. And so the greatest threat to all of these people is whistleblowers. That's why they always seek to destroy them, discredit them, and that's why they absolutely refuse to hire them anywhere in the industry 13 years later, even though they know they represent the absolute best among bankers.
Now, being based in the Midwest right now, something that really it really kind of came to the fore when we were talking about our whistleblowers in particular, but true whistleblowers in general, is that none of them know that they're whistleblowers at the time. They have no clue because all they're doing is their job. You know, and I think that that is one of the things that really resonated with me, you know, right now being in Akron, right? It was that there's this ethic where you do your job. You do your job as well as you can, and good things are supposed to happen. These whistleblowers were doing exactly that. They were doing their job to the best of their abilities. They had no idea that they were being whistleblowers. Every single time, they were simply doing their job the way that they've been trained to do. And that's what got them into trouble. And that is like the big perversion, you know, of what's happened within our corporations, that this stuff occurs. People simply doing their job should not be a sin. And that's the thing that happened to these people. And they have lost their lives because of it. And that is just criminal, absolutely criminal.
Amen. Well, listen, I think we have maxed out the questions and answers from this session. I'm sure people will have more. But
what? I'm just getting started, man.
Yeah, man. I'm all in, man. I'll stay up all night, man. It's all good. But what I want to do is just do a final wrap up here for you guys and just let you all give a final, each one of you, and we'll start with you, Eric, since you're on now. Each one of you kind of give a parting, you know, if you had your druthers, what people would get from not only the con, but from your time with us this evening. And I'll just go round to each one of you.
I think if anything, it's that as dark as the story is, it's ultimately a story about hope, right? We know that the right things can be done. We show in the con that in the past, when the right things have happened, there have been tremendous outcomes for the country, and that the country's been in similar places as it is today. And we found ourselves out of it, not through killing each other, not through doing like all these other things, but through the process. It can happen, and it can happen quickly. People forget that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was very much a centrist Democrat. He was not Mr. Progressive, you know, whatever guy. But when it became apparent what the will of the people was, he did what was right. So ultimately, the biggest thing that needs to come out of this and the con is that it's dark, but there is hope. We can do this. We just need to take it upon ourselves to turn the tide.
Very good. And Patrick?
Look, it's easy, Steve, man. This journey, it saved my life. It restored my faith in goodness and people that had integrity, because when I was down and out and I was at the end of my rope, I had no hope. I just had watched my world dissipate around me, and I had nothing, man. I had no answers. But I went looking, and because of Eric and because of Bill, I got more answers than I could ever dream of. And now my goal, my objective, my everything is to make sure the world understands what the con is. Because if we don't fix it, we're done. I think it's that simple, Steve.
I agree. Mr. Black, take us out, brother.
So every once in a while, like in the debacle, in absolutely impossible circumstances in a Reagan administration, you can achieve remarkable things. When you have the potential for a new administration, even if it's very weak candidate, all kinds of possibilities exist in terms of the appointees and in terms of people in Congress. We've got something that makes sense to them politically, so we have, you know, some chance of succeeding. But I will leave with the part of my Irish heritage, which is we decided a few centuries back that it is slightly better to laugh than to cry. So I will leave them laughing.
Very good. All right. Now I'm going to give a shameless plug here for RP, RPIA, and of course, Macro and Cheese. Folks, we are a bunch of volunteers, fathers, daughters, sons, you name it, trying to just do the best we can outside of our work hours and everything else. So we're always looking for help, volunteers, people to roll up their sleeves and help us pull off great events like this. I want to thank Bill, Eric, and Patrick, of course, for their tireless time. My goodness, they give us 3 hours tonight. It's beautiful. But this also costs us money and money that we don't have. So we're always looking for donations where possible, just to help us pull this up, because in order to get out a big message, you got to have a big platform. And we're doing the best we can. We're expanding, we're growing, we're doing massive amounts of behind the scenes stuff with a brand new website that's getting ready to come launching here in the next week or two. It's gorgeous, and I want to definitely feature the con as a key part of that new website. Jules, this is a break from the MVP. We're going to have to expand MVP to include some more of this, but I want to just thank everybody for their time. If you can contribute to us financially, please go to our Patreon. We had one gentleman on the bridge that went ahead and did that. Pete, thank you so much. And also, please, make sure that you follow these guys, follow them on Twitter, follow them on Facebook, follow their careers wherever. And we'll make sure that inside of our website, you get all kinds of access to be able to find books that Bill's written and other historical things from the other gentlemen, all their videos and stuff. We're going to make sure that we showcase those things on the website to give it its proper place. So with that, Virginia, do you have anything you want to add before we close out?
No, thank you all. Thank you, Steve, as well.
All right. Well, with that, thank you all very
Steve.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
We love you guys. Thank you for the opportunity to share our story with you. We appreciate you. Be well.
Yep.
Thanks,
Thank you all
guys.
so much.
Appreciate the chance. Thank you.
You
Take
got
care, everybody.
it. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
All right.
That was
Here we
great,
go.
guys. Excellent.
Yeah, that's a good job.
Very, very good.
Well,
Good.
all right.
All right, guys. I am.
Steve, I was so glad you're here. I'm not kidding. Okay. It just came together. John's hard work and listening to all these women telling him stuff. Okay. Telling him stuff. And he's faster than I am. He can do things quicker. He's got it. He did so well. I'm so proud of him.
Yeah, you did a great job. But Rosie,
Who's a good boy?
You've set it up. Who's a good boy? Rosie,
good boy.
You've set it up because you had worked out the kinks by running it for so many months. And so, I mean, as wonderful as John is, you contributed quite a bit to that. Just saying.
I had 9 months of kinks. What the hell?
Exactly, because you're kinky. What can I say?
That's right.
Real quick though, I want to bring a point to the team, smaller team now.
Yeah.
What you saw tonight is it's a core aspect of what I'm looking for in a webinar. This is the kind of look and feel that I want to be able to do. I want to bring a guy like Sandy Darity in here to talk about reparations and spend hours asking him questions. I want to bring people in. I want to, you know what? And Kami John, I hope you're paying attention. I see you over there.
Listening.
I am thinking very, very hard about, I have access to lots of whistleblowers, by the way. I have access to people. I have to work some webs back because I burned some bridges, because you know how I throw the haymakers. But
you, Steve.
Yeah. But I'm dead serious about this though. I am all MMT all the time, and have been that way for over 10 years. And it's time to add this side into the game, I think. And it'll give me a new lease on life. Also, I mean, I've been exploring racial aspects of this, and this ties in the predatory inclusion that I got from Kianga. And I don't know if y'all have witnessed my growth as I've taken these podcasts, but I've learned a lot, and I'm hoping that as an organization, we continue to grow, and not just in knowledge, but I think that we have a lot of opportunities to grow beyond what we've done and really make a huge difference for the world. And yet, we can go ahead and stop the live stream now. I think that it's probably time for us to do that. But I just am really, really thankful for this whole team. And I hope you got a good glimpse of what is possible. I hope what we just did tonight gave you a feeling like, oh my God, if we did better promotion, if we had a little bit more